Dora's a pretty big topic, and we've got about 40 minutes. So what I'd like to, I've got about 25 slides. So I've just highlighted keywords on slides. So it really is going to be a kind of a bit of a stroll through Dora, to be honest with you. And I'll take questions at the end. Often the questions that come are answered in 2 slides time. And so we'll talk about Dora, Dora this, Dora that. And in fact, I'm forever chucking stuff up on LinkedIn under the hashtag Dora. So a real takeaway for you is if you're looking for good Dora stuff, just go into LinkedIn and put hashtag Dora in. What is Dora? If you look at what it stands for, Digital Operational Resilience Act. Look at the last word first. This is a law. It's not a best practice. It's not a good idea. It's actually a law. And the law has penalties and it has teeth. And there's regulators out there who are keen to actually enact the law. What's the next part? Resilience. This is all about actually being resilient to a cyber attack and IT risk. So it's about improving resilience in the ICT area. And we use the term ICT these days. It's IT, but in law it's ICT. It's IT and communications technology. And the operational bit means it's actually very detailed in places. So change management, your expectations on change management are set out over 2 pages with about 25 or so particular items that you need to check off in your own change management process. So it's detailed, it's law, and it's IT resilience. There's a lot of words on here. I don't expect you to read all the words. I've just highlighted certain words which are really important because in Dora, what you actually have is a set of articles. So we see something in brackets. The first number is the article number, and the second is the paragraph number. So again, like anybody who is into kind of contract management, always looking to cite the references. So what is the scope of Dora? Well, the scope is set out by the regulators across the 27 EU countries is 22,000 organizations, a third of which are financial entities, and around 2/3 are the IT service providers to those financial entities. 22,000. The 8,000 financial entities are only 40% ready on Dora. And there's only 48 working days to Christmas. Okay, how do you get from 40% to 100% in 48 days? I have no idea. Dora is underpinned by third parties. Most organizations have outsourced large chunks of their IT. They actually buy in services in terms of lots of SaaS services, lots of software, hardware. These are all IT services. And these third-party providers are really important within the scope of Dora because they too need to be Dora compliant. Microsoft needs to be Dora compliant. SurveyMonkey needs to be Dora compliant. Okay? And the key words over here are data services, because the data services where you push and pull data from, as it says down here, financial services outside of the EU, push and pull data with you, even though you might not need to be Dora compliant today. Because you're pushing and pulling data into a Dora compliant organization means you are a third party provider to that organization. So you might be sitting here thinking, my organization is UK, we're not in the EU, Dora doesn't apply. But somebody inside Dora is naming you as a third party, and you don't even know about it yet. Failure to comply. The legislation, Article 50, Para 3, says it will be dissuasive. They don't say what that is, but it'll be dissuasive. And some countries in the 27 are actually talking about putting directors in jail. Okay, this is pretty serious. A degree of saber rattling, but it's serious. If you're a TPP and you're not Dora compliant, you can lose 1% of your daily worldwide revenue, which is millions if you're cognizant, or Accenture or IBM. Okay, potentially millions. So that's the context. It's big, it's wide, and it probably includes everybody in this room. Here are your 5 takeaways. I made it real simple. I'm not going to give you the takeaways at the end. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. One spreadsheet where you list all of your ICT contracts. It's a complex spreadsheet. I've done several of them. They're quite tricky to do. We'll show you how to do it. The next one, there's 2 key service level targets, RPO and RTO. We're all IT people in this room. You understand what that means. This is 99.99999 something % availability. This is really serious, trying to work back from short RTO and RPO numbers. But it's set out, Article 12, paragraph 6. Imagine a European piece of legislation talking about RPO and RTO, but it's here. 3 is third-party risk reduction, and it's all about reducing the risk during the sourcing. There's a lot of due diligence you have to do before you can get somebody to sign contract. When they're operating that contract, there's a whole set of obligations as well, in terms of managing them and their subcontractors. When the third party is exiting, make sure it's got an exit plan in the contract. I've just reviewed 80 contracts for a register of information. Only one of them had an exit plan in it. Out of 80 contracts. So we're writing to all of these people saying, we need an exit plan, please. Like, we're not expecting much back from SurveyMonkey. We're not expecting something back from some of big suppliers like Cognizant, Accenture, and so on. Number 4 is fortification. Just get around it for. It's easy to remember, fortification. Because it's an ongoing fortification process. And 5 is obviously the 5 pillars of Dora. You pick up anything about Dora, it says there's 5 pillars. Here they. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this presentation breaks into 3 sections. The first part is Dora in context. The second part of what are the Dora deliverables? What is the minimum you need to do before 17th of January? And the third part is the 5 pillars. The very first thing you read when you open the Dora document, this is a recital 1, it's the very first article in effect you read, is it describes what Dora is. So what is Dora? Well, what it's saying is ICT keeps our economies running. Yes. There's a lot of interconnectedness, correct? And this interconnectedness amplifies the risk, particularly for this financial sector, because of vulnerability to cyber threat. And because resilience is not well addressed, Dora is going to do that and get everybody up to a minimum level of resilience. That's what we're trying to do here, a minimum level of resilience. So this is the purpose of Dora. Well, what is Dora? So people in this room will have had a look at the Dora Act. You know, it's a depressing thing when you read it for the first time, okay? Because we're used to ISO standards, we're used to ITIL, we're used to processes, we're used to things being in bite-sized chunks that we can get our head around. We think in zeros and ones, and then they get loads of this waffly text all mishmashed up together, which you have to unpick. And there's 79 pages of it. There's 25 financial entity types that apply. And the very last one, it says, including third-party providers. Okay. And then when you break it down, you've got 106 of this, definitions, some of which are helpful, many of which aren't. And 64 articles, and within these 64 articles are the 5 pillars which we'll come on to. And then what we do, what many organizations do, is actually try and make some sense out of this and use kind of audit terms by putting control objectives, where you pull out the key essential components and you actually set them out as one line control objectives, just to make some sense out of it, because there's lots of duplication across Dora. So you've got 80 pages there, plus about 500 pages of underpinning regulatory documentation, which Sarah rightly says hasn't been properly signed off yet, with 3 months from Christmas, and people are still saying, well, what's the finalised RTS documentation? Plus there's another documentation, the ITS, which explains how to create this spreadsheet, this register of information. So you've got the thick end of 800 pages here to make some sense of. And take this off before it falls off. So how do you actually get your head around this? I'm a granddad. I've got 2 grandchildren. Maisie and Letty, 6 and 4. And last time I saw them, they said, what do? You still working, Granddad? Or they call me Papa B. You still working, Papa B? Said, yeah. What do you do? I said, I work in a fantastic world of good and bad called Dora. Dora? Good and bad? What's that all about? And I said, well, it's like this. You find a pot of gold, like they did in the olden days. And the pot of gold is precious, and you had to protect it. So you put it in a castle, and the castle had towers and walls, and you had to constantly make sure that your castle was strong. You fixed it. Now, the pot of gold are critical or important functions in your business. The revenue generating part of your business, the functions around that, which actually you need to deliver the customer service to get your revenue in. This is your pot of gold, and this is what the baddies are trying to get to. Okay? They want to get through the castle walls, and this has been happening from the year dot. Castle is the framework in Dora, and the fixing the gaps is the gap analysis and remediation. It's a ancient story. The second part of this is no castle is on its own. There are tradesmen, they come and go, they provide services. You have contracts with them. You have to take those contracts and put them in a register. And here in Dora, we have it, the register of information. Who are the tradesmen we deal with? Now, there's a long list of these tradesmen that you deal with. But some of them are close to the gold. Some of them provide the software that you rely on to deliver your services to your customer. So these are what we call your critical TPPs, who underpin your critical or important functions. Okay, so this combination of your team and teams from elsewhere come together to deliver your services and actually form your gold generation process. And so you have to make sure that these, what I explained to Maisie was the Goldie TP, the Goldie tradesmen are extra safe, and they too have subcontractors. You have to check them as well. And Dora is very strong on ensuring that your subcontractors to your TPPs, your supply chain, is well understood, thought through, and tested. So that's your castle, that's your tradesman, then you've got the sheriff. Okay, so where's the sheriff come into this? Well, every year you actually have to do an audit of how good your castle is, on who your tradesmen are, how safe your tradesmen are, write it all down and give it to the sheriff. Okay, so it's all about the goodies and the baddies. We're trying to keep the baddies out. And they get that, and indeed, some directors of quite senior companies, having seen a slide like this, also get it. Okay. I live in Arundel. Don't know if you know Arundel, it's on the south coast. It's got a castle. I'm slightly interested in castles. I'm slightly interested in architecture. When you actually start looking at architecture and castles, it's kind of fascinating because they're all similar in that they protect the gold. They have towers, they have levels, and actually there are blueprints of castles which are adjusted on size, topology, etc. And actually there's a lot of architecture that goes back in time, protecting gold. But how does this work going forwards? Well, we now have digital architecture. And some of you will recognize this as ITIL version 2, 1986. 10 processes. I've done a lot of ITIL audits in my time. And it's amazing that these basic processes are not up to what we call CMMI 4 for most organizations. Okay? And yet you look at these things, and these are the bedrock processes, which became ITIL 3, which many people still the gold standard ITIL, and then ITIL 4, which is more value-driven. But these historically are protected the SIFs. That's why people put these processes in place in the first place. A little footnote to this page. In 1986, I worked with a Danish guy called Hans Dittmar. Anybody ever heard of Hans Dittmar? He's the actual forefather of ITIL. And Hans and I wrote the Service Level Management ITIL book in 1986. And from 1986 to 1990, I used to have a really fun 3-day course on service level management where we would write a service level agreement. We'd write a service catalogue with a front end and a back end. And the back end was all the technology that was required to deliver the service to the business. But this still is at the heart of ITIL. There's now around 40 processes or practices, as they call it. They keep on getting reshaped for IT or Microsoft Operating Framework, COBIT. They're also finding their way into all of these ISO standards. And there are so many ISO standards. I mean, just on asset management, for example, I thought I'd better do a bit of homework before I turned up today. And there's like, was it 96-400 ISO standard for asset management? I didn't know that. And yet I'm paid to know this stuff. So this is the basis of the digital architecture. And Dora relates to quite a few of these things. Again, I'm basically a guy who always wanted to be an enterprise architect, because everything I do looks at architecture, from strategy to policy, to the description of the tower, to the processes and procedures. We do it internally, or we outsource it. What are the technologies that are going to be used? What's the SLAs? What do the commercials look like? And how do we govern it? And I use this for every piece of outsourcing I get involved with, which is quite a lot. And you apply that to each of the 40 practices that are directly set out in Dora in some kind of a big way. They could talk about root cause analysis. I read that as problem management. Okay? And so here is a whole set of practices or towers inside Dora. And each of those, if they have this rigor attached to them, which they used to have probably 10 years ago when ITIL was still strong, people would actually have a lot of documentation with policies and processes and procedures. It's kind of withered away. And I put that down to the agile movement, where all the money went into the sexy new stuff and hardly any money went into the boring old stuff. And the boring old stuff was called ITIL. A lot of ITIL stuff is kind of withered on the vine. Dora comes along. Okay, we need documentation. We need processes. We need standards. Okay, dust it all off, freshen it all up again, and reinvigorate your ITIL estate. Oops. But Dora is really good at being oblique on all of this stuff. If you just actually have all of these set out from strategy through to governance, you're well placed. I can't go far without creating a spreadsheet. I apologize for that.
Spreadsheet.
And the world of Dora has got lots of great software associated with it. These products are what are in the family of GRC, governance, risk and control. Because Dora is just yet another compliance vehicle alongside others. So there's lots of software out there, but most of my clients are small to medium-sized enterprises. And we'll start with a bit of spreadsheet and then work from that. Here's a spreadsheet. Here's a piece of Dora. This is Article 6, Paragraph 2. Here's the Dora regulation. And you can read it for yourself, but it talks about policies and standards, protect all the assets. Written by a lawyer. We're in IT, we've got to unpick this. Okay. So how do we unpick it? Well, what we do is we first of all map it to ITIL. Okay, we talk about protection here, so then it's risk and security. We also map it to ISO 27001, so that we can make some sense to it, because people have already got these things, and so we're actually saying, give us this information, we'll do some mapping against this, so that we come up with a score on how compliant you are. If you've got nothing on risk and security, then actually your score is 0. If you've got loads, you're probably closer to 5. So, and then you have the control objective that maps to it. And this is at the heart of many of these GRC software products. But this is just a simple way of representing it. So this is the end of the first part of this session. We're just kind of looking at Dora in the round. We're looking at Dora through the eyes of a child. We're looking at architecture on castles, the digital architecture, how it comes together. Let's get real. There's got to be certain deliverables available on the 17th of January. What is the MVP, minimal viable product, that you need to have in place? Let's have a look at it. You need your compliance position. You need this sort of information. So, one's a report, one's a spreadsheet. That's the minimum you need. You look at the center of this diagram, you've got Dora. You've got 5 pillars. One of these pillars are the various articles that make up those pillars. And then from those articles, so for example, Article 5, governance, there are 13 control objectives that we use. And as you go around, there's about 250 control objectives each. If you then, my PowerPoint's gone a bit weird, I apologize for that.
The only one.
This is somebody who's tasked with doing Dora. This, and we'll have a look at this in a moment. This is actually a taxonomy design for the Register of Information. So you're basically setting out all of your contracts up front. Contracts do we have? Next is we're looking at all of our ITIL standards, whether we're COBIT or MOF, IT for IT. And what ISO accreditations do we have already? So we're just dealing in terms of standard IT parlance. And then we move into the control objectives to say, okay, risk management appears in these 10 control objectives. Let's actually take the risk management stuff we've got for IT and actually map it against those 10 control objectives and see how adequate it is. Whilst all the time, we're in and out of the Dora documentation. Most organizations at the SME level start with the Dora documentation and try and work outwards, and it blows the mind. We start at what you've got and work inwards, as indeed many people do. So it's about mapping your ICT artifacts. And the problem is, so many organizations, those IT artifacts haven't been touched for some time. Problem management, incident management. Suddenly Dora comes along and it's like, dig it all out. Larry's retired. Who picked it up from Larry? And you've got this kind of internal search processes, which was kind of everyday parlance 10 years ago, but it's kind of slipped away. Here's what you get at the end of your gap analysis, which is in terms of the control objectives. Anything with a low score drops into an action plan. The action plan needs remediation. This is where the 40% of the people are kind of in Dora at the moment. They've done quite a lot of this gap analysis, but you're left with the action plan. The action plan needs money. People don't want to find the money. And of course, with less than 50 working days to go, it's unbudgeted. How the heck are we going to make this happen before the 17th of January? So this is the kind of aha moment that people are kind of facing up to at the moment. And this is a challenge. Having the resilience plan, which is pegged to a gap analysis, will buy you some goodwill with the auditor when they come. Okay, they want to say good progress. You're finding the money. You're taking the top 2 or 3 projects. You're working on those. Play. Okay, you agree with that? Yeah. It's written down. It's actually planned. It's actually happening. So let's look at the other side, the ROI. I've done several of these. Oh, my goodness me, they're fiddly things. Why are they fiddly? You have to identify all of your business functions. The business function is not defined. You work it out. Okay, well, so you take the organization chart, you find like reasonably low level the organization chart, will say that's a function. Okay, sales, service delivery, service support, data integrity, business functions. Which one of these are absolutely essential to run the business? Well, we don't deliver the service to the customer. Okay, they don't pay us. So we'll make that a stiff, critical or important function. Okay? It gets a gold band around it. Same with data integrity. We have to ship the right data to the customer. This is an example from Madrid. And these all got contracts directly with the Madrid office. Okay, fine. We can actually map which contracts go to here, and I'll show you how we do that in a moment. But this is where it gets complex. So many organizations have actually snapped off the IT department, snapped off legal, created a separate company, and buy services from the IT company, which is internal. Okay? That is treated by Dora as an intra-group third-party provider. That organization has contracts with loads of people. That third-party provider connects into the Madrid office and supports each of these. So all of these things here map back into these critical or important functions. And actually putting that in the spreadsheet that is provided, which is actually broken down into around 10 worksheets with lots of duplication between them, makes it really very difficult. And this is a very simple example. Okay, by the time you overlay that with the Paris office, the London office, the Johannesburg office, and feed it up to the group entity, again, it becomes really very difficult. And even folks don't even know which contracts map into which function. How do you work that out? Well, fortunately, having been doing benchmarking studies since 1990, for people like Compass and ISG, folks who can remember those kind of companies, I'm very used to kind of looking at technology towers, putting all the costs and people in a technology tower, all the contracts. But we're IT specialists, we understand how it works. That Fred in function 1 uses a CRM system. You notice it's called Salesforce, but that's all they know. Okay. Now, you've got the combination of the SaaS world and the on-prem world. So you've got all of these towers, end user, it's supported by Cognizant. There's a delivery team behind the scenes doing backups, running the help desk. You've got security, you've got IT management, you've got the network compute storage. And you understand that all of these things have an asset underpinning, have a configuration item underpinning. It used to be very easy when it was in-house-ish, but now it's SaaS. One of the questions Dora in the registry of information is, for this service, what country is the data in? And from what country is the processing done by either people who manage the data? And so I talked to the HR people, so you've got this SaaS service, paid for by the HR manager's credit card, by the way. Okay, I mean, that's the other world you get in. Who pays for this stuff? They don't know where the data is. We don't know where the processing comes from. So we're having to write to these organizations to say, A, you need to be DORA compliant. B, here is a modified version of Article 30, which is the TPP one, for you to comply with. And where's the data? What are you doing with our data? So this is the top level in terms of basic mapping. Once you've done that, you can pin all your contracts onto it as best you can. Okay, so this is fairly straightforward service architecture, service mapping. And once you've done those two layers, you can then actually come up with your taxonomies, and then from there, you can start building your ROI spreadsheet. Whatever you do, do not start with the DORA contract or the DORA regulation per se to do your DORA work. Find an easier way to do it. And do not start with the spreadsheet. Start mapping your contracts without thinking through what the hierarchy is and how it all works. How long we got, Marilyn?
10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay.
I'm still taking coffee.
So we've looked at the concepts of DORA, the gold, the SIFs, the critical tradesmen, baddies. We've looked at the two deliverables that you have to have in January, which is the documentation supporting your DORA compliance level. And we looked at the register of information. Now we're looking at the 5 pillars. And each of these 5 pillars is actually very extensive, because not only have you got what's in the 79 pages of DORA, you've actually also got the 500 pages of RTS underpinning it. And within those 500 pages of RTS, you've actually got embedded articles within that, which are also legally binding. So the whole of the RTS isn't just general advice. There's hidden stuff in there that you also have to be compliant with. So you think, great, we've done the 79 pages of DORA. No, that's only the end of the beginning. You're going to do the register of information and the RTS stuff. And I've only pulled out a few snippets on all of these, because you can read the documentation for yourselves. It's it's in there. But what is risk management about? It's actually about having program and framework. And both of those need to be anchored at the board of director level. They're very keen in Article 5 that top management, they call it, is on the hook for everything that follows. They have to know about it. And coming back to Sarah's point about letting people know, it should be kind of open communications up and down the chain to top management, which is often maybe a GRC director or some senior responsible officer at floor level. And it talks about what's the processes, tools, roles, and contracts. Not a cavalier way into detail in one area, but there's a lot of general parlance about you need all of this stuff across Dora. Other important things are the training, learning from the events, and then the training. Who's to be trained? Board of directors, senior managers, right the way out to people who are actually using the systems. And a friend of mine works at Sun Life Canada. And I said, are you involved in Dora? Never had it before. I said, it's about security. He said, I had a funny email not that long ago, and we were trained not to do anything with these kinds of emails. I thought that's exactly what Dora is. You know, an end user knows nothing about resilience, but he's been trained to look out for dodgy emails. That's great. Indirect Dora and regular audits. And of course, one of the big things with the audits is if a TPP is audited, they get to pay for the privilege of being audited. So, but I'm a TP, I'm working for you, financial entity one. You're going to pay for it, am I going to pay for it? So actually sorting out the payment and the audit rights up front is really important when dealing with your TPPs. This is ITAM, this is ITSM, this group, and this is assets. And Dora is big on assets. Understand the assets, protect the assets. What are you doing about assets, both information and physical? Understand where they are. And the problem is, so much is in the cloud. Who knows where it is? Even the cloud providers themselves don't even know where it is half the time. Okay, so what chance do you have? Well, there are tools out there to actually suck up all your software, all your SaaS systems, and hold them in one place. So it's about protecting the assets, identifying the RPO, RTO, and also risk exposures from other financial entities. Okay, because Dora is about the ecosystem, not just the organization. So let's move on quickly, because Sarah's already mentioned a few of these things. The incident management, the key things here is how you respond, how you detect, handle that whole life cycle of an incident. The roles of responsibilities within the organization of who are your second, third, fourth line support people on incidents, including your TPPs, root cause analysis, and actually major incident management. This is quite a different beast to normal incident management. This is, and many organizations do treat this differently and actually have major incident managers in place. And the reports, there's a lot of reporting and timeliness for reporting in Dora.
Is there a definition of a major incident?
Yes, it is 4 pages long. Just to define an incident and then 3 more pages for the criteria for understanding the event.
Wow.
It's a whole pillar on its own, incident management.
Is it a good definition? Or is it 4 pages of?
I would say anything that is 4 pages long is probably not a good.
The key thing that leapt out at me when I looked at it was penetration testing on live production systems. Historically, no one's dared go near the live production systems. Now they're actually saying once every 3 years, you have to do it if it's a critical or important function. So they really raised the ante in terms of just doing normal pen testing and the like to actually the next level up. So third-party risk management, again, they make a big deal out of this. quite rightly so, because of all of the dependencies on the third parties to actually run the businesses these days. Again, the same things come out, policies, processes, roles, tools, and this is a common theme across it. It's all contracts, from your most huge contract, right the way down to your 200 quid used by one person, SaaS service, to check expenses. They make no provision for the long tail. Okay? And fair enough, because anybody can cause a problem. But all the contracts need to be Dora compliant. So there's a Dora addendum has to go out to all suppliers for them to sign up to it based on Article 30. And all of these TPPs need to be compliant. Okay? This is a huge deal, a huge deal. So if you've got people in vendor management or supplier relationship management, their workload's just gone through the roof. Okay? The security workload's just gone through the roof. And one of my clients, they're saying, I've got a security team of 10 people, half of which are almost full-time on compliance matters, just doing the paperwork, and half of them are actually protecting the organization. Yeah, and it's the same with vendor management. And so there's annual reports to submit on TPPs, and as you go through Dora, there's lots of annual reporting and weekly and monthly reporting required.
What's the level of requirement where you've got that tail end? Like you said, an app that's used by one person.
There is no insights. There is no. Now, Dora's talking about proportionality.
Yeah.
So there's always a proportionality. So if you're dealing with one man and his dog software company in San Francisco, he ain't gonna get. You'll never actually get him to be Dora compliant. However, you still have to write to him. You have to show the regulator that you've done the due diligence for all suppliers, but focus on the top 20. So just pulling all of this together, information sharing is about collaboration within the community and sharing information as best you can. So everybody gives everybody else a heads up. And back to the 5 takeaways: 1 spreadsheet, 2 SLTs, third-party provider, qualification, and the 5 pillars. So thank you for listening. A bit of a whistle stop tour of Dora. Hope you've picked up a few thoughts on it.
So in my spare time, I also volunteer for St John Ambulance as an operational first aider and trainer. So you go out and like yesterday, teaching 6 brownies how to tie each other up in bandages, which was highly amusing. But I wouldn't rely on them if you were dying. But they had great fun. So I'm going to talk about CPR and incident management, and this is more about the how the things that can affect how you run a major incident. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a video which will tell you about CPR. There you go. It's a nice stat, so you'll be tested on that at the end. Okay, so let me just tell you a bit about the Home Office and St John Ambulance, and then we'll go into the actual session. So most of you will know who the Home Office is. If you've got a passport, that came from us. If you got arrested, I've got your details on the system somewhere. I won't get them within you, whatever money you give me. So we've got about 60,000 staff across the UK. We provide services to over 200 law enforcement. Department spends 13 billion a year. It's about 17 last year because of immigration. Processed over 3.5 million applications for visas, and we maintain 12 million criminal records and reporting of nearly 6 million crimes a year. And we facilitate about 125 million people coming across the border every single year. So Heathrow, ports, etc. St John Ambulance. So St John Ambulance is a volunteer organisation. It's a charity. It's been around since the 11th century. It's got about 1,000 people in it who provide first aid and medical services. And we also support the NHS and the National Emergency Response as well. So COVID, for example, our ambulance crews gave up their time to support the NHS during that. Some stats from last year: 16,000 attendees at community first aid sessions. So the session I did with Brownies yesterday is an example. Nighttime economy, emergency hours, cover for emergency hours, over 8,500 events we cover, 158 cardiac arrests with 39 lives saved as well. We also train young responders as part of that as well. So, right, that's enough about Home Office. And so, chain of survival you saw there for CPR. So recognition of a cardiac arrest and calling 999. If you don't do that, there's a 0% chance of them surviving. Okay, pretty simple. Once you've then got early high quality CPR, that increases the survivability by 10%, but for every minute you delay, that takes 10% off of that. Okay, so if you take the 10%, 100%, you've got basically 10 minutes. Otherwise, there's no chance. Defibrillation, so using an AED or defibrillator increases that chance of survival by another 40%, but not having one for every minute reduces by 7%. And then advanced life support adds another 10% if they arrive within 8 minutes. Their response time is supposed to be about 7, but 8 minutes is part of that. And then obviously post-cardiac care in hospital, and then post-hospital care. So that's how the chain of survival, which you went through before. The IT chain of survival. Compare the two in a sec. Incident occurs, we detect it, we acknowledge it, we respond, we repair, we resolve that particular one. If you compare the two, there is quite a lot of overlap. So the same process you'd use in the chain of survival is pretty, in my view, applicable to the chain of survival for a IT incident. I'll come back to that in a sec. So what I'm going to talk about is 5 things in leadership that can affect how we respond to an incident. Okay, so think about this in the context of major IT outage. I've run too many to count, including ones that always get in the news when the borders are not working, the system's not working, e-gates are not working, it's all in the press. So those are the type of incidents I have to deal with, which are high pressure, to say the least. So we look at 5 things. So the first one, we're going to look at fixation. So there is participation, and you are going to try and outwit the system and get the right answer to this. Okay, so how many times did the red file pass? Any guesses?
13.
13. Okay, it is between 1 and 100, so it's 13 times. Any difference on 13?
9. 11.
Is that 9?
9.
15? Okay, that's what the answer is.
That.
Yeah, so some people will notice it, some won't.
No.
Okay, so we're talking about fixation. So you were fixated on counting that thing going round, yeah? And that's also called inattentional blindness and perceptual blindness as well. And it's nothing to do with any type of defect. It's to do with how much your brain can take in and how much bandwidth there is in your brain as part of that. And there's a notion that you use how much percent of your brain.
5.
Understand? Yeah. So that's what the myth is. But actually, MRI scans have proved that for just a simple task, you use nearly all of your brain as part of that. So forget 10%, it's near more like 100%. Things that can affect your attention, your fixation is things like dehydration. So if you're dehydrated by 2%, that reduces your ability to cognitive process as a part of that as well. Your brain uses 20% of the energy that you use in the day. So my view of that one is, if you want to lose weight, just think really hard. But, you know, so you have to fuel it, but it uses 20% of it as part of that. And even if we believe like things like cholesterol is bad for your health, it plays a key role in keeping the brain in check. Around 25% of all your cholesterol is contained within brain cells. So, you know, it is all about what you eat and how you best perform. So in that example, we say you took part in, you were hyper fixated on that red folder. But let's actually see how that worked in this example. So in this example here, the guy with the white beard and white hair is giving this chap here directions. In a second, you'll see some people come with a door and swap out the person there who's entirely different, dressed entirely differently after that. The point here, so the guy with the white hair didn't notice this at all. When asked afterwards, no, it's the same person as far as he was concerned, because he was hyper fixated on how to get to a particular place. So the point here really is that being focused on one thing means that you could miss out on other information. Yep. So in an incident, if you're entirely focused on the incident and it must be that cause, that could stop you from thinking about the wider context for it. Okay. Conformity. So, in that example, which is obviously a joke, blindly following what you've been told rather than thinking or disagreeing with what's being said. So basically conforming to what he said, I only stop the car when I hit the dashboard. Okay. In normal social environments, this can be caused by social pressure from the majority of the group, for example. So if you're on the call, you get conformity in everyone thinking that whoever's the loudest is part of that. So this was tested by a guy called Ash in a conformity experiment quite a while ago. So don't worry about the 1960s clothing. You think of it a bit retro. So let's see how that works. So they did 12 of those trials, and in those trials, 75% of the participants conformed at least once. They agreed with the wrong answer, and about 25 obviously didn't conform. So why do participants conform, and why do people conform to what's going on around them? When the people in that experiment were asked, why did you conform? Why did you give a wrong answer? Two answers to that one is either I want to fit in with the group, or I didn't want to be seen to be different than the group, so that's called normative influence, or because they believe the group is better informed than they are, so I must be wrong, they must be right. Things that can affect conformity, the size of the group, so the bigger the group is, the more likely people are to conform to a consensus that's being put forward. But if just one person questions the view of on a call or in that group, that drops by 5%. So you just need one person to say, actually, I think it might be this. When the answers to a problem are more difficult or very similar, it's harder for individuals to disagree as well. So if it's 95% right, then they'll probably go with that rather than going, actually, there's 5% which says it couldn't possibly be. And it can have both a positive and negative effect as well. So the attitude conformity also become apparent in another common form called the bystander effect. So the bystander effect relates to a situation where people witness an emergency and don't offer any particular help. When there are several observers present, however, the pressure to intervene does not focus on one of those particular people, so like groupthink effectively. So examples of that is a person coughing in a restaurant begins to cough loudly, choking, and the patrons who are in there don't do anything to help. Or in this example, this lady here, been passed by outside a busy train station in London, and passed by 34 people, and no one stops to give her any help at all. You can see the timer there is going. This lady here is thinking about it, considering it, but because nobody else is stopping, she's going, actually, I just continue until this one chap comes over and then starts, and then other people then get involved. So the bystander effect of just ignoring what's going on. In more common times, so this all comes down to someone thinking about actually pitching in to help, actually saying, actually, I know how to fix this and I'll help as part of that one. This could be, in this incident, for example, or simply knowing that, so in society, what we're talking about here is in that clip there, lots of people were taking videos of this, but nobody actually thought to call the fire service. So the entire house burnt down, but a great video of it on TikTok and other stuff, because nobody actually thought about pitching in to help. They assumed that somebody else had done that, and that they weren't the one who needed to call. So what are some of the negative effects of conformity? So it limits creativity and independent thinking. So people individually thinking, which is why when you do things like workshops and you want to get ideas, the best way to do it is to get people to go off to individually think of ideas, and then come together as a group rather than think of it as a group. You get much more diversity. It can promote harmful social norms and practices, and prevent personal growth and self-expression as well. As I said, it's all about groupthink, essentially what we're talking about there. So how to avoid, I guess, is the next bit. So to combat conformity, it's important to think about the two phases of problem solving: divergence and convergence. Okay, so divergence happens when the group consider as many different possibilities as possible. Okay, so for example, a common test of creativity is alternative use test. So how else could I use this thing? So could well be, what are different uses for a brick? To build a house or in a riot? Yeah, entirely random other thought as part of that one. So you think about all these different possibilities, and then the convergence is then whittling those down to actually what it can be. So if you're thinking about an incident, what are all the possibilities? Is the cleaner unplugged it, or has it blown up, or is the site not working? All those to come down to what the final option is. Ooh. It's supposed to be there. And it comes back. There we go. Okay, so cognitive ability. So your brain, as we've already established, you use about 100% of it, or near to, rather than 10. And system 1 and system 2. System 1 is fast, it's subconscious, it's automatic, everyday decisions, but it is error prone. System 2 is really slow, very conscious, uses a lot of effort, used for complex decision, and it is much more reliable. Okay, so we're going to test that. I'm going to put up a question. It's a maths question. So you'll have 15 seconds to come up with the answer. Okay. So a baseball bat and a ball cost £1.10 together. Bat costs £1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? 5p. Got 5p. Anyone else? 10p. 10p. 5p.
Nothing.
It costs 5p, as you can see on there. You move it forward, please, this instead. Okay, so yeah, 5p. There's a whole reason behind that, because if the ball costs 10p and the bat costs £1, then the cost £1 more than the bat would have cost £1.10p, basically, is what it works out. I've got the example here if you want to read the answer to it. Next question. A lily pad in a pond doubles in size every day. At day 48, it completely covers the pond. How many days did it take for the pad to cover half the pond?
37.
Okay, any guesses?
47.
47? You want to say 24?
47.
Yeah, so 47 is the answer. Indeed, because on day 47, it covered half the pond, it doubles in size, so therefore it would double to cover the whole thing. But you can see there that, you know, you're trying to answer it really quickly, and if you're under pressure, you're trying to answer it really quickly, and you come out with your gut instinct and your fast response, which is unreliable. And it's not 10p and it's not 24. Yeah, as opposed to using your slow part of your brain to work that out. And that's because we're lazy. We don't like effort. And that's why engineers use other people's code, because they don't want to code it themselves and all that type of stuff. We reuse things that have already been done. Because we don't, you know, our brain is trying to limit how much energy it's using. That's more energy intensive than this one is.
It's good to be lazy.
It's good to be lazy, yeah, and think. Any guesses on what percentage of your decisions are made by system 1 and system 2?
90-10. 90 to system 1, 10 to system 2.
95-5. That's in a neurotypical person. You know, it will vary between people, but on average, in neurotypical, it's 95% of your decisions are made by system 1 and 5% is made on the other side.
Can I challenge your lazy?
Yeah.
I heard a thing on this years ago, and they said that if you try to system 2 think your way through the day,
Yeah.
you might get as far as putting your shoes on.
Yeah, absolutely.
You would starve to death if you try to use system 2 thinking, because the idea of making toast using system 2 would take you 3 hours
Absolutely.
and consume more energy than what you would do from the toast.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which is why 95% of your stuff is done on system 1 rather than system 2. But the important stuff should always be done by system 2. Yeah. So the stuff that requires real deep thinking, what the hell is this problem and how the hell can it be?
And that's why negotiation is so difficult, because most of the negotiation books tell you to contact system 2.
Yes.
But most people are using their system 1 thinking. So
Absolutely. Cool.
Negotiate.
Easy.
Need both people on system.
Right. So let's have a think about human factors then. So human factors. So telling you to suck eggs. Performance versus pressure. So how much pressure you're under, how much performance you have. So if you don't have a lot of pressure, your performance is in this bore out stage at the bottom here. Okay, I'm going through that at the moment because I'm leaving my home office and joining NHS England in 2.5 weeks. I've handed over to somebody else, so I'm now just coasting my way through and I have to do things like this to keep my brain engaged. That's bore out, but you know, this is the ideal zone we want here. And obviously too much strain and too much pressure provides burnout as well. When you think about in terms of an IT incident, we think about there, how long are people actually operating and running that incident? Yeah, you know, we're quite keen to keep people on it until it's fixed, which could be 16, 20 hours. Certainly some of the incidents I've dealt with are very long incidents. So when you're running an incident, you've got to think about much more in advance. Who is going to take over from these people? Where's my next, you know, cohort of people to come in and try and help resolve this? Some of the things you see, that's not me, I hope. the symptoms you get for burnout versus the symptoms you get for bore out and burnout are pretty similar. Demotivation, disengagement, pretty much the same. Cynicism. So, you know, depression, overwhelming, anxiety, insomnia, etc. are very, very similar on both ends of that spectrum. Anybody know what the drink drive legal limit is on a breathalyzer in the UK?
3 units, maybe?
I read your slides last night, so
The answer is
35.
35 milligrams. Okay, so 35 milligrams of alcohol. Above that, you get arrested and taken to the police cells, and then I'll see your record later on. So, talking about sleep deprivation here. So we're talking about people how they work. So 8 hours sleep. Have your first coffee, and then your wakefulness comes up. You have your afternoon slump, which you'll get after lunch, and you'll fall asleep. Then you come all the way down, and then we're down to 1 night of sleep deprivation. So your incident started at the end of the day, and it continues going in. When you get to about, about 18 hours, that's the equivalent of you having 22 milligrams of alcohol in your system, how you make your decisions and how you work. Once you get down to about 24, so one day, 44 milligrams. Okay, so you are drunk when you've been awake for more than 24 hours. Yeah. So how could you run an incident effectively if you're drunk?
Would you like me to show you?
No.
But how does that work for incident preparedness? Because if you look at, for example, doctors who are on the front line, they're awake for days at a time dealing with incidents. And with the best will in the world, we can always say, oh yeah, it's just easy, you just swap out the doctors. But if there's not enough people to swap them out to give them the rest that they need, how do we manage it?
So in those type of incidents, so my daughter's a paediatric nurse, so this is a common thing. 12-hour shifts are not a good thing to do unless you prepare physically for those. But yeah, if you're doing 3 days on the trot on call in a hospital, it's really hard, especially if you're the only person who's on. Mistakes are going to happen. That's just what's going to happen. The way you can counteract that is you make a decision and then somebody else checks that decision as well. Yep. So when you're giving a drug, for example, so if I give, I know someone fell over and broke their leg and I gave you Penthrox, which is like gas and air, I go through and I go, right, I'm going to give you Penthrox, I'm going to ask you the 7 questions or so I need to ask you. Somebody else will check those answers with me. We check to make sure I've done it right and then give it to you. So two eyes on it, basically. Same as you like to do with a change, have 2 people working on that change. Doesn't get rid of all of it, but at least you've got 2 people to blame rather than 1. So in terms of fatigue, I'm not going to read these ones, you know, yawning, difficulty concentrating, more withdrawn, decreased diversity of thought, which we covered previously, and poor communication. So this one here, just to give you a quick quote from a responder who dealt with the Deepwater Horizon incident. Okay, so quote from there. Right, let's have a look at competence, which is, I'm starting a new job in 2.5 weeks. I'll go in going, I know everything about that particular job. And therefore, I know everything that I need to do. Okay, so the very first time you wrote 10 print hello world, when you go to 10, you then went to LinkedIn and put I am now a programmer on your LinkedIn profile, because you know everything about it. As time goes on, you come up with, there's actually more to this than I thought there was. I'm never going to understand this, which is the oh shit moment I normally call it. It then starts making sense, and trust me, it's complicated when you start understanding more as part of that. And there are 4 stages to competency. So unconscious incompetency, so you don't know that you know that you don't know. Not very good. Conscious incompetency. That's usually much smaller words, really. It's when you know you don't know how to do it. Conscious competence, which is when you do know how to do it, but you need to think about how you actually get doing it. And then obviously unconscious competence, where it's second nature to you as part of that. So if you think about that, that's like learning to drive a car, really. You stall, you keep looking at the pedals, the gears, you know where the gears are, hit the wrong pedals, and all building up to essentially producing muscle memory as part of that. Okay. We can decide whether that was unconscious competence or not. So that is called the Dunning-Kruger effect. So how do you counteract it? So encourage debate and basically arguments is the short way of describing it. You need to handle it properly, but else it will build this risk of aversion and negativity. But essentially what we're saying here is ask people, if you're on an incident call, anybody got any other ideas or how this would work? Do you think this would work? Ask the question and ask the question as a group and then ask it individually as well. Yeah, so everyone would agree that's the right one. So if you don't ask, you don't get, basically. Okay, so what does it mean? So a warning. Following streamed scenes may be distressing. Feel free not to watch what I tell you. Okay, I'm going to be showing you CPR in action, but from a distance. So feel free to not look at the screen if it affects you. So here we are, Bob Whelan with his wife of 42 years, Elaine, and I'll let Bob explain the situation. Okay, so October the 22nd, Tuesday, there's a match between Brighton versus Nottingham Forest, a match which Bob travelled down to from Lincolnshire to watch. On his way down to the Amex Stadium in Brighton, which was a really cold day, he went via Wembley to have a meeting about how to get more women into football, which I think is really good. I think my youngest played football and she's a girl. So talking about the Women's FA and discuss how you can increase female participation. Okay, here are some of my colleagues. Peter, who's 66, Dylan, who's 28, and Miles, who is, how old do you think he is?
18.
16.
14. He's a very tall 14-year-old. He's a cadet. So they were the volunteers from St John Ambulance on duty at that Brighton versus Nottingham match. So let's go back and see what Bob has to say. Okay, so the previous warning, there are going to be CPR. Okay, so if you don't want to let don't work, and I'll talk you through what's going on. So Bob down here in the bottom left-hand corner, there he said, if I take a little step, I'm not feeling too well. And then collapses to the floor. Okay, over here, this lady eating her chips, who's one of the stewards, comes across, still eating her chips. Don't get cold. Go over and have a look. Do you want a chip? No. So she's now checking. Can you hear me? Can you wait? Can you tell me your name, etc., etc. That stuff that we would normally do to check consciousness. Not conscious. Police officers come over as well. And he's having a look. So two of them having a look. You know, great crowd event. Another one, someone else turns up. And eventually, 1 minute 40, Dylan and the team turn up. They then do a check to see, they put him in the recovery position, they roll him back and they do their checks. Keep an eye on the clock. So they're looking for 2 breaths in 10 seconds. That's not there. Which means the person is not breathing properly or not breathing. Got Miles getting with the defib there. Dylan doing CPR and sorry, yeah. Miles requesting more assistance. You never use a defib, this is what they say to you. And this is the output from that defib. So they stop for the defib to check. Okay, then see the other crew turning up, so some of the paramedics and turning up. Rob's not going to do anything. He knows how to do CPR, I can do it probably asleep. His job is to assess what's going on and decide what else has to happen, yeah? A lot of consultant doctors, PDs, don't actually do much work. They just stand around and orchestrate everybody else around them as well. That's exactly what he's doing. We've got paramedics there continuing the CPR. So we're about 3 minutes 40. So to get everyone in, if you remember how long you want to start CPR as early as possible. So within 1 minute 40, we start CPR. So they continue on from that point. So here's Bob the day after. Converted from Nottingham Forest to Byrom. So here's in the day after. So Rob Galloway was the crowd doctor, and this is one of the reps from the football club. To give you an idea, at that particular site, which we provide services for, there have been 7 cardiac arrests in the past 12 years, and the success rate has been 100% on recovery. Anyone want to guess what the odds of that are?
1 in about 1 million.
1
in 1.28 billion. Okay, so the moral of the story really is if you're going to have cardiac arrest, have it at a football stadium. Because there are a lot of defibrillators around and people who can help you there. But let's have a look at the actual times there. So Bob collapses. Stewards arrive. 3 other people plus the police arrive after 20 seconds. 1 minute 45, we're on scene. 2 minutes 10 performing CPR, first shock. 3:22, paramedic crews arrive, doctor arrives. Bob survives a cardiac arrest. Okay, all good. But what does that mean for this 1 minute and 45 seconds? So that's nearly 20% reduction in their ability to be recovered as part of that. What we had there was the steward eating her chips coming across, misidentified that the person was unconscious rather than unconscious and not breathing. So put them in the recovery position. Police officer then turned up, didn't do any checks as well. He just assumed what had happened before, and the person had made that assessment that the person was just unconscious. Okay. So we got a Dunning-Kruger effect in there. You know, they think the person who went over first thought they knew what they were doing. They hadn't had sufficient training or refresher training, which is the most important part. Police officer just went, oh, well, you must have done everything. So therefore you got the bystander effect as part of that, until we turn up and then start from the beginning and go, right, is the patient breathing? No, let's start CPR. Okay, so that time left missed there. Okay, so the 5 morals of the story. So fixation, you can get fixated by one goal and be blind to everything else. Green cross code, stop, look and listen. Stop what you're doing, look at what's going on and listen to what everyone else is telling you. When you're dealing with conformity, people want to speak up, but they won't if they're in a group. So ask for dissent. Yeah, ask for alternative options. And it is the question, has anyone got a different idea or a different reason or a different thing? Cognitive ability, so our brain is lazy, can trick us into the easy and most obvious answer. Again, green cross code, stop, look, listen and think. Human factors, how to deal with that. Humans are fallible, especially when they're tired and stressed. Or bored. Spot the issue, address it, and have a plan B or a team B, effectively, that you can come in and deal with it. And then competence. You're not as smart as you think you are. Possibly. And ask the question, do you know what you're doing? A stupid question is normally always the right one to ask. Okay, some people would say, you know, yeah, I know what the problem is. I'm going to be hero syndrome and I can fix this. Ask them, do you know what you're doing? To avoid crashing into a lamppost. And one final thing. You've read my slides. Anyone not read my slides in the room?
Yes.
Okay,
I've read
you read them.
I've not read them.
I need a volunteer to hold this for me who's not read my slides. Okay. So this is the job I'm going to do if the NHS fails, okay? So I'm going to ask you some questions. You have to think about the answer as quickly as possible and repeat and give the answer, okay? Don't think, just come straight out with it, okay? Ready? 5 plus 1.
6,
4 plus 2.
6,
3 plus 3.
6,
2 plus 4.
6,
1 plus 5.
6,
Keep saying 6.
6, 6, 6,
Faster, faster.
6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6.
Stop, name a vegetable. Quick.
Bud. I don't know.
Oh. In the bag.
In the bag. That's a trick question too, isn't it?
It is. It is. So the answer should have been what you're going to find in there. Error. That's what the answer should have been. You took too long and you thought too hard.
Why would 6 make me think of a carrot? It doesn't rhyme.
It doesn't mean anything to it. So if you remember about how much your brain can control and how much it can get overloaded. Yeah, I just want the first answer with the easiest answer you can think of. Yes, you've got an accent which didn't help me. I did this in the US and they went broccoli, but it's all right. I had broccoli as well. Just in case. And I've got potato that I could get out of my bag, but just prove that's true. But most people answer carrots. That was what I'm trying to prove there is have you should have the in there as well.
Oh,
Is your gift for participating.
So keep the carrot.
You can keep the carrot, it's a dog for you. If you've got a dog,
I have a dog.
yeah, there you go. My dog stole one off my table. Okay, how are we doing? We're near enough done. I'm gonna look at this as my. There you go. So nothing else, you're going to go and learn CPR now. There you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. Were there any questions? We've got a couple of minutes. Has Everybody have any questions? But I think the main question is, when are you going to go and do some first aid training?
If you run community groups and such like, just get in contact with St John Ambulance. We come out and do first aid training free of charge. So mother and baby groups, guides, walking groups, etc. I did a session about 3 months ago for a walking group in Farnborough. That convinced them to buy a first aid kit that they used for a serious incident when they're out walking. And the comment from the AE was, "You did a really good job on first aid," and you know that made a better outcome for that person.
I feel sort of humbled after the last speaker. I think I'm not going to wake up with that, but I just wanted to share a story that was recently in the Azores on holiday. Place you're to go to the Azores. But Michael's been almost drowned in the sea in the Azores due to some very, very large waves with strong pullback. And it was thanks to a lifeguard that I'm still with, and literally he was drowning in front of me. So seeing the volunteer, well, I tried to establish, are they volunteers? After we, rescued him and the rest of it, he's fine. But went through to somebody and said, can we make a donation? Because in the UK, if you go to the RNLI, the lifeguards, it's volunteers, and they would make donations. It's not the same over there, so we couldn't do anything like that. But having been through that, I'm really relating to some of the stories in the last talk on there. So ISO 20000. I'm a consultant and trainer, and I also chair the UK BSI British Standards Committee on Service Management, IT Service Management. I have chaired that for many, many years. And I also represent the UK on the International Standards Committee for 20,000. And I am actually the editor of 20,001, which is the requirements part of the standard. So standards, it's been really interesting, and I'm glad I wasn't on first. I'm glad I was able to listen to all about Dora, because I didn't know anything about Dora. And other items first, and getting all the mentions of standards and how much that's helping. And I can see from listening to that if a company had got 20,000 and 27,000 and 22,301 and it would really help them with Dora. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and supporting operational resilience. So starting off with a little bit of introduction in case any of you don't know 20,000. So here we are, ISO 20000 Part 1, Service Management System Requirements. So it is part of a group of standards that we call Management System Standards. And that shares with 9001 for quality management, 27,001 for information security, 1977 for the one, and many others as there. So it is an international standard for service management, and it specifies requirements. And in standards, we have a very specific language, and they're shall statements. The organisation shall have a business continuity plan or whatever, whatever it is. And because it's got requirements, it means that an auditor can come along and say, are you complying with these requirements? And an organisation can get a certificate to say, yes, you're complying with these requirements. So as far as 20,000 is concerned, and all the other management system standards, we need compliance and not maturity. We can't say, oh, I'm a level 3 on that bit and a level 1 on that bit. Oh, but I'm really good at that bit. I'm a 5 on incident management. It doesn't work like that. You're compliant or you're not compliant. So organisations can certify to these using auditors for that. And supported by 20,000 by the standard is only 20 pages of requirements. So it's very short, but you have to have underlying frameworks of the how to do something with it, like ITIL or IT for IT, the 1,000,001 frameworks that are around these days. Okay, and those are very, very long. And sometimes people look at these frameworks and just think, where do I start? You know, I can't possibly do 100 pages of incident management. It is, you know, but what you could do, even if you don't need to certify your organisation, is look at 20,000 and say, actually, there's half a page here about what's essential for each of the clauses. A lot more on change management, but about half a page on most of the other bits. So you could look at those and say, right, that's my starting point. That's what I need to do. And then I can go out to all the frameworks and decide how to do it. So really useful in those ways. So, and design for continuous resilience. So starting off when the last version of the standard, which was 2018, and it takes about 3 years to work up to a standard, 3-4 years to work up to a standard. This is the 3rd edition of the standard. We need to make sure that it's applicable, as all international standards have to be, applicable to all different types and sizes of organisations. So public sector, commercial, not-profit organisations, huge big corporations, very small enterprises, you know, all different sorts. We have to make sure that works. We really concentrated on making sure that the requirements that we had there said the what you need to do and not how to do it. So that will depend on the context of your organisation. And you can go to all of those frameworks for the detail of how to do it. So it's the what you need to do that we're looking at. It is technology independent. We couldn't possibly write a standard that relies on certain sorts of technology because there is so much out there. And of course, it's ever changing and standards don't change very often. You really don't want them to change often because you're certifying organisations for these around the world. And if it keeps changing, that makes life very difficult. So it's technology independent. It's also framework and method independent as well. Okay. It is for IT services, use IT and digital information, which is pretty much all services, most services these days. There. So this is the 20,000-1 framework. I'm not going to go through everything in there. But we start at the top, context of the organisation. So we have to understand the organisation, what its purpose is, what it's trying to do, what are its services that it's got, who are all its suppliers, who are all its partners, who are the stakeholders. They're called interested parties here. Purely because stakeholders doesn't translate in Chinese, Japanese and Korean. That's why it's called interested parties. Then we can decide the scope of our service management system. Is it just one service? Is it a set of services maybe for one sector or one function, or all services that we do? And then we establish our service management system. So that's the planning, the design, the setup. Leadership, absolutely critical. I think we said in Dora, they use the term top management. That's what's used in standard as well. I remember when we first started going from a British, this started as a British standard to international, and we went to ISO meetings and started to use, the British standard used the term senior management. And then we got the French speaking up saying, you can't use senior. Why not? Because that means old. So basically it would translate as old management if you use senior management. All those normal things, policies, roles, responsibilities, risk. I'll talk a bit more about that later. We have to do risk assessments, looking at that, setting your objectives, planning, all the support functions, all of these bits, all the bits you'd expect to see from ITIL and any of the other things. But really important are performance evaluations, so monitoring, measurement, analysis and evaluation. So within all of these things, there are a lot of things that we need to monitor and measure to make sure we're going in the right path. But it's no good just monitoring and measuring. So many companies, so, yeah, we monitor that, we measure that. Okay. Then what do? You've got to evaluate it. What does it mean? Analyse it and evaluate it. And then, okay, so what are we going to do? Does it mean we've got to take an action? No action at all. And that will all help with your operational resilience when we get to that. Internal audit, we talked about that in Dora, how much audit there is. So internal audits are required on their management reviews. So top management, making sure that they're on top of the key things that are happening here, not the detailed day-to-day incidents, problems, whatever, but the key things and really make sure we're achieving what we planned for at the beginning there. And you're reporting on that. And then dealing with any non-conformities we find and making sure we have continual improvement. And one question I often get asked, if we don't meet an SLA, is that non-conformity? Well, no, because you might have lots of non-conformities if you do that. But probably the reason that you're not meeting the SLA is non-conformity. Are we not following the process? Have we not got the right resources? Is somebody doing the human error factor that came in there? The reason might be a non-conformity, but not the actual not meeting an SLA. So very quick look around there because I want to concentrate on some other things rather than what. Every year, ISO International Standards Organization do a survey of the top management system standards. So the last complete one we've got is 2023. Unfortunately, there was a glitch in the standard and then we didn't get the Chinese figures this year for all sorts of reasons. So I've had to put in China 2022 figures and then the totals. So the original and the most prolific of all the standards is quality management, ISO 9001. Up there, and I don't think everybody will ever meet that with the 1.4 million. This is global accredited certificates. So there may well be more that are non-accredited, some of which are still good, some of which are almost give me some money and here's a certificate. So you have to be really careful of some of those sort of certificates that are out there. And then there are fraudulent certificates as well. Environment came from nowhere a few years ago. People are taking that very, very seriously now on that one. Occupational health and safety was a British standard and national in a few countries. It then got changed only, I think, 3 or 4 years ago into an international management system standard, and again raced up to the top in there. Information security is one that is very relevant to us. From 27,001, we see 20,000 is down 27,008. Huge advances in China. Deregulated certification in China and a huge difference. Anti-bribery, probably relevant. I would imagine in Dora, business continuity, very relevant in a few others. Asset management, this is the general asset management one rather than the IT asset management standard. Just sort of getting going really on some of these at the bottom, just sort of. But all very relevant to Dora. So the ISO 20000 series. So we started to look a few years ago now. We had the part 1, the requirements part of the series came out in 2018. Then we also have a lot of guidance standard that it's going on in the world at the moment. So we said it's technology independent. I love this one. We didn't have any of these fancy gadgets. It's brilliant. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, you know, whether you're using laptops, whether you're using desktops and servers or some specific gadget for your industry that you're using, you're still providing an IT service there, technical service. For whatever it is, that doesn't matter to the principles of what you need to do in the standard. Anybody like a new framework, methodology, whatever? You know, there's a myth that you have to use ITIL to get 20,000. It was much more so when we first started. The first international standard was 2005, the first British standard. 2000. And it was more closely aligned then, but now there are so many more frameworks to be used. And so, you know, we've got to make sure by declaring what you need to do rather than how you do things. To reach the context of the organisation. The challenges now, so particularly around cybersecurity type challenges, the sort of fraud type challenges, but also the ones of somebody was saying people have forgotten some of the good service management stuff there, or they don't do it. It doesn't get the emphasis that it used to have because it's become a little bit business as usual. But actually, operating the services now, virtually everything is digitised. That's the be all and end all of most companies. You know, keeping the lights on, keeping the services running. So it's really, really important. And if I bring in a couple of examples here. I remember Sainsbury's supermarket to go shopping some months ago. Got greeted at the door with somebody saying you can't use mobile payment today, and you can't use your Nectar card, and you know you can't do this and that and the other. But if you've got just a physical credit card or some cash, you can come in and do your shopping. Okay, so loads of people went away. I carried on around the supermarket, and they were giving out chocolates to make up for things. It was really nice, Lindt chocolates. It was really good. And as soon as they said there was problems, I thought it's going to be a failed change. And the next day it came out. Yeah, guess what? It was a failed change. Somebody had made a change to the payment system. It wasn't Sainsbury's systems. It was the payment system that they use. It was actually affecting other supermarkets as well. And it had this bad effect on that, and they put it right by the next day. I think they put it right. But think about something much more serious, the CrowdStrike that came on. Global impact. It stopped planes, it stopped trains, it stopped people's life-saving operations. It stopped all sorts of things that happened. And again, I thought, this change. Yeah. So I went on, did a bit of research, and they've actually put out a statement on CrowdStrike, and the CEO has done a public statement to say our testing of changes was completely inadequate. And they have now had some experts in and had a look at that. They've put in a lot more criteria of various gateways through the change process to try to make sure this doesn't happen again. They're also going to give options to their users, limited options, I think, about do you want to accept this upgrade or not. So limited, so various things going on, but often when these things happen, it's a change. So it's so important to get those and change with this. So we've got a lot of uncertainty, ever so much uncertainty coming in everything we do. So this is where we need the operational resilience. We've got to have that just to keep the lights on, keep our services going and running. So going back to ISO 20000, so ISO 20000 is not just part one, the requirements. There's lots and lots of all of these parts that go with it. So part one, I said, is 20 pages. It's just a lot of shell statements, a little bit of introduction, a lot of shell statements on there. Part two explains that in some more detail, follows through the same clause structure. And give some explanation. If you've got half a page of incident management, you've probably got 1.5 to 2 pages. It's about 3 to 1 of explanation in part two. Part three, guidance on scope and applicability, probably just used by consultants or implementation managers. Part five, implementation guidance, how to do a business case for this, setting up your program planning, and all of those sort of things in there. concepts you probably wouldn't use unless you work for a certification body or an accreditation body on that, so it's very specific on there. Part 10, concepts and vocabulary. I'll give you a link at the end. You can get that one. I'll give you a link at the end to that one. It's the only one. Part 11, relationship between 20,000 and ITIL 4. So that one's really good. So if you're using ITIL 4, you want to go to 20,000, it's got a mapping that way. If you're using 20,000 and you want some frameworks, you can map the other way to the ITIL 4 and such, and lots of explanation as well. 14, 15 and 16 I'm going to come back to, and 17 should be published in the next couple of months. I'm doing the final bit with the ISO editors at the moment. This really supplements part 2. When we looked at part 1 and did some investigation on did it need to change recently, what came back was a lot of things, a lot of comments that actually didn't indicate that the standard needed to change, but indicated that people didn't understand it all, that we needed a lot more guidance in there. And that's what this does. It takes a lot of scenarios to give a lot more guidance on how to adapt and adopt 20,000 in various scenarios. So that's very good. And there's also a handbook, which is for more chatty style. So parts 14, 15 and 16. 14 and 15 are out, 16 in the next 3 to 4 months. So SIAM, the service integration and management. This is when companies have multiple suppliers and they want them to be managed by a single service, either internal to the organisation or external consultative type service integrator. So part 14 says if you've got a SIAM situation, scenario in there, can you still use ISO 20,000? Can the customer organisation use that? The main organisation, or can a SIAM integrator use that? Yes, the answer is yes to all of those. And this gives you the guidance on that and the mapping to the SIAM framework as well. So it's resilience by ensuring those suppliers work together and that supply chain works together as needed. And that all responsibilities are clear, everything should flow through. Agile and DevOps, so agile, faster way of working in breaking down the requirements into small stories or chunks, developing, releasing more quickly with functional elements until you've got what you want. And DevOps going from development into operations teams together. So more collaboration and communication in there. How to use that within service delivery. A lot of people think those are only for the development side. It works very well in delivery. So how to use those within 20,000. Sustainability, very, very big in international standards world at the moment. ISO have made commitments at the last London meeting on climate change about that, and we will see some requirements on making sure you consider climate change as any of the issues. Does it impact your services, and how to be more conscious of sustainability as you're running your IT services. So those aspects there, building in resilience on those aspects. So that should be out in 3 to 4 months, I think. So relationship with other standards. So all of these management system standards have a common structure. These bits are specific to each standard. All of these bits are structure that you must use, and it has some common requirements within all of these as well. So because we've got that, it means that we can merge some of the standards together into a single management system. So every organisation will have a management system of some sort. A management system being purely a name for the policies, the processes, the plans, the governance, putting everything together in a structured way. And then what we can do is actually integrate some of these standards into the organisation's management system, into one combined management system in there. Now, what we find with the standards is that, for example, across the whole organisation, you might say 9001 is applicable to the wide organisation, so is 27. But this one might be purely within the IT department, as that one as well. So, you know, you've got different standards having some different scopes, and that's okay. We can still look at combining into what we call an integrated management system. So the various things together, and there's lots of common areas, not just the common bits of the management system standards, but also the specific bits. So, for example, in 20,000. We have some information security requirements. You can't do service management without information security. So it's a very small subset of 27,001. It's about 3/4 of a page instead of 20 pages of 27,001. Equally, we have a very small, I think it's 3 lines, asset management requirements. Very small, and it refers to 1977. So if we look at bit more of the operational resilience examples from requirements of 20,000. So 20,000 has requirements like all the management system standards, and it expands on those specific to service line. Looking at risk. So for assessing what are the risks that could happen to our services, what are the risks to our customers, what are the risks from our suppliers, from our partners, our supply chain. What are the risks to our management system, to the success of our management system? So all of those sort of things. And we look at opportunities. And then what are we going to do about them? How are we going to address those risks? How are we going to mitigate those risks? That all has to be considered in there. It's all going to help us with our operational resilience. Supplier. So 20,000 considers 3 types of supplier. It considers external suppliers, so outside of the organisation, internal suppliers within the overall organisation, and customers who also happen to be a supplier. Okay, we look at those as well, and we have some requirements. So it's really trying to bring those into the scope, to really ensure that resilience, so we've got proper management of those. Now, I will say it doesn't cover the whole supply chain, because we did have that at one stage and we had to take it out, because the standard can only refer to the organisation that's being certified. We're just trying to achieve the standard. We cannot put requirements on other parties. So we definitely can't go out to the whole supply chain. Change management we've already talked about. Now, a little bit more on the change management, because in ISO 20,000, this is the biggest area. If you look at number of pages, it's about 3 pages. If you look at change management, it's got design and transition, and then release and deployment as well. So we've not only got the simple changes, the technical changes that sort of everyday work, we've also got design and transition, and we have a change management policy requirement. You have to actually say, what are all the types of changes I might have? So you might have the normal technical changes, you've got emergency changes, hopefully you have very few of those. And then we have another one we call changes with the potential to have a major impact. Now that might be a really tiny change, but a very high risk, or you're using some new technology or new resources or whatever it is, that you actually want a lot more emphasis on that change and actually run it as a project. And that then, when we go into service design and transition, will take you through a plan, plan, design, build and release. And then we've got all the release management as well. So having to have that change management policy and define what those criteria are is really, really critical and quite a game changer. A lot of things. Configuration. So we can't control all our changes and do all these other things unless we know what our assets are and our configuration items are, and that we know where they are and what status they are, and have we updated them, or do they need updating, or whatever it is about. They're really, really important for our resilience in there to make sure that we've got all of those details. And this is often a difficult one because configuration is a bit invisible. Top management can't see it and nobody cares about it, and it's a bit of a pain sometimes to do, but without it, that's when things are going to start to fall apart. I think where configuration management came from, it came from making sure you're not holding the wheel on the plane. So you've got to have it right. Major incidents we've talked about a few times today. Incident management is there in 20,000 and a requirement for a major incident procedure is in there as well. And really important to find out, incident, what are your criteria for a major incident? Who can say, yeah, okay, major incident, definitely. Are we going to manage that differently? Who's going to manage it? Is it always the same person, or does it depend on what it is and such? And then what do we do afterwards? The root cause analysis, the lessons learned, and the actions. So many times I have seen fantastic post-implementation review or post-incident review, whatever. I say, okay, yeah, okay, so where's the evidence that you've done those actions? I'll show you that bit. So they're great, we do brilliant things, but it doesn't get onto an improvement log or an action log or whatever it is to actually make something happen as a result of it. And that's the really important bit to say, let's make sure this never happens again. And of course, your business continuity plan, we call it a service continuity plan in 20,000, which links to the business continuity plan. So I read something after the CrowdStrike debacle, and it was for NHS. Just a moment, I see your hand. And it was some, I can't remember what it was, just it was a part of NHS, whether a hospital or something, that had been really, really seriously impacted. They could not do certain operations, they could not do certain real life-changing things that they couldn't do. And they said, we had a continuity plan and we'd written it and we ticked a box, but the test came in real life and that wasn't good enough. And now we've learned from that we've got to do real tests. I have my favourite client I've worked with for many years, anyways, and they've got a service continuity plan. So I always say, okay, what tests have you done in last year? Well, this, they have a floor in Canary Wharf. They do a switch off every year. I said, yeah, I know about that. Yeah, so we did that and everything was fine. Yeah, but what else did you do? It isn't just electric being powered down. What about an attempted cyber attack, or whatever else it is that's happening? Well, we haven't had time to do that, so it's not good enough. It's not good enough that you haven't done those things. You've got a great plan, which is identify all sorts of risks to your service, but you think that just one little test a year powering down is enough. It's not enough. You don't have to physically do things. You can scenario workshop it, and they work great. Scenario works fantastically. So get those things done. The climate change bit, just a little bit more on there. So 20,000 we saw part 16 is being developed. to help on the climate change and sustainability groups, 19770. The ITSM management standards also working on developing guidance on sustainability, and I know there's things in common there about reuse, things like reuse of IT assets and extending the life, and putting some requirements on your suppliers and your supply chain, all that sort of thing going on that. There are, if people know about the United Nations Sustainability Goals, 17 UN SDB, sustainable development goals, and they cover all aspects of sustainability, not just climate change. It also looks at the social and economic aspects as well. And there is has a publicly available standard. That means you can go and get it. That one is out now. It's free to download from the ISO. If you go to the ISO website, just Google that. Guidelines for contributing to the UN SDGs, and I know some companies are important to be looking at those aspects on there. And there's another one, which is also another PAS on health and safety risks arising from climate change and climate action as well, which is really interesting to look at there. So the various things that are coming up. So just last slide, just some useful information. So part 10, which was the overview vocabulary for 20,000 series. If you go there, I'm assuming that's slide. If you go there now, if you go to this publicly available standards bit, it's very hard to find on ISO website. They don't like people to go and get the free standards, but follow that. You will get to a long list. Numeric order, so keep scrolling down, and it's lots of pages down till you get to 20,000, and it is quite weird and wonderful standards you'll see on the way that you can get for freely available. Okay, all sorts of. There's an ISO webpage, so this is our ISO committee webpage. Loads of stuff on there, so lots of white papers. News all about our projects, all the sort of things that are going on, and look at all different bits of it, because it's got a lot of tabs and you need to go on various bits to find. We've also got a LinkedIn group. This is specifically for the ISO standard. There are various LinkedIn groups which mention 20,000, which don't actually really cover 20,000. They cover, I'm running and I'm doing this, that, and the other. So this one's is monitored to make sure that it's about what we're doing. It's growing and growing. Do go into it and have a look in there, and you'll see all the news about what's coming up, what's happening, and lots of really good stuff. So David, who's sitting second there, is one of the administrators on that. Does a fantastic job, and I know Sophie does a lot. So I saw one question up there.
It was related to a question that was asked earlier on. I don't know if it's, is there any kind of alignment between how major incidents defined in 20,000 and how it's interpreted by other areas?
Not 4 pages.
No, that's what I was thinking.
Dora, that's for sure.
Yeah.
There is no specific definition of major incident. There is a definition of an incident, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's something around something that is impacting the quality of the service and various things like that. A major incident, there is a requirement that organization defines criteria to be identified as a major incident. And each organisation will have something, what are their criteria in their particular context organisation, you know, because it will depend on are a critical service, you know, are they a 24/7/365 service, whatever it is, yeah, they're going to have different criteria. They have to define it themselves. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Any other questions?
Yeah, on the climate change.
Yeah.
Are the standards, we've been seeing some slides on power and AI, the demand for AI,
Yes.
stripping available power that we have, so it's slowing down AI. And to the point where governors in the States are now vetoing people building data centers because it's politically not clever. Microsoft even put planning permission in for start 3 Mile Island up again. There's all sorts of things going on. But are the standards going to kind of like limit that, or even say you need, don't use water, you now need to use something else and things like that?
I'm not an expert anyway on these, and I haven't looked at these. I've been looking at what we're doing in 20,000, which certainly doesn't go that far with anything. But I suspect they will, because if you look at the UN Sustainability Development Goals, you can just Google those and you can find those free. And I suspect it will, but I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question.
Lots of big financial institutions have gone off to the cloud because it was, it will be sustainable, but actually the clouds are now going in the wrong direction.
When organisations need to report on their carbon usage, etc., that sort of thing, that they need to report on it. And Azure has got it, or whoever,
Greenwashing.
Yes, greenwashing, yes.
Yeah.
That is in the, so
Yeah.
greenwashing is called out in the standards.
Yeah, it should be as
So,
well.
so how you report, how you measure, how you analyse, and then for the assessor to understand if actually it's all just a lie. It's not quite as black and white as that. But
Companies have been pulled up for it because you can't just go, oh, well, they're doing it, so I'm zero. And you're not. You've just moved.
You just moved it. Yeah, giving away the problem.
Yeah.
I also think though on that point, it's taking people back to what I call proper engineering. So I saw something the other day where people had built a data center in a clever way and they were using Bernoulli's principle to suck cold air in at the bottom. And I think in that way it's reinvigorating people's engineering and problem solving mindsets, because we have, as you say, a finite set of resources. How do we make sure that the resources that we have are used in an effective way? And I'm sure none of us want to go to our CEOs and go, oh God, you know how you spent like 30 million moving us to the cloud? Yeah, well, that cloud's now got the support. Spend another 30 mil and buy us this cloud instead. That's
Place data centers in the sea and make them waterproof.
Yeah, it's just about that. Had folks committed to and sustained their commitment to ITIL or COVID or ISOs, we wouldn't need the burden and the threat of Dora.
Yes.
So what is BSI doing to help people want to take up the ISO and commit to it and sustain it?
We do a lot. BSI does help a lot on those things, but when standards are put together, British standards, international standards, European standards, whatever, American standards, all the rest, standards are voluntary. And so you can't force organisations to use them. But quite a few standards are in legislation, they're built into legislation. I'm trying to get back to go in the numbers a bit. So 27,001 is in a lot of legislation. 45,001 is in huge amounts of legislation. That's why that's gone up, just rocketed when that came out. And a lot of the others, they might not be, I think 14, not it's in legislation, but a lot of the others are in bids. So tenders are saying you must be 9,001 or 14 or whatever it is, whatever's relevant to there. Now 20,000, we're not seeing so much on that. 27 definitely in the right context, you'd see 45. Medical devices, that's all over the place in legislation in there. And if you look at the I can never what it's called now, Department of Business and Innovation and Skills or something, whatever it's called these days. They've got a certain place on their website which is called, I can't remember it's something like prescribed standards or something like that. I might have the term wrong. I can't remember exactly, but it has a list of standards which goes beyond these that are in certain regulations relevant to the UK. That we do. Quite a lot of them are around product type standards as well, and sort of services and management system type things. So there is a list there. 20,000 is not on that list. I think 27 of these. 7 the other side. Go look at it.
You made a really good point, because having worked in a company that had government contracts, if you want a UK gov contract, you've got to have 9,001,
Yes.
14,001,
Yep.
and 27,001.
Yeah, that's right.
So
yes, there you go.
Could BSI
Yes.
lobby UK gov to say and 20,000?
They do to a certain extent, I would say. They raise awareness and they are, so although they are an independent world charter body, BSI, they are associated there, but they're not a government department.
Mm-hmm.
So it, they have to be careful how they tread, but they do try.
Okay, that's good.
Yes.
A general question. I've got the 20,000 2018 in front of me here.
Yes.
Because and just on one point about is something compliant or not?
Yes.
I'll just read you this. It says effectiveness, extent to which planned activities are realized and planned results are achieved.
Yeah.
How do you measure whether it's compliant or not? How do you assess? And I suppose what I'm really asking for is for kind of a workbook that gives work examples of what is compliant or what's not compliant.
There are some in part 2 of the standard which helps to explain. So where there are requirements about effectiveness, and one of the requirements in internal audit is to check that the service management system is have been implemented and is effective. So you'd be looking when it says read it to me again, first bit.
Extent to which planned activities are realised and planned results achieved.
So planned activities and planned results. So you've got service management plan, you've got plans for services, you've got plans for changes, you've got, you know, all sorts of things. You've got policies, you've got processes, all the things that you were talking about in Dora that you've got to get. And it would be the same as any auditors that you would have in there going in as an auditor. I mean, assessor as well. So UK Accreditation Service, we audit the auditors basically. So I was last week sitting in and watching an auditor, making sure they were doing a fair and objective audit and everything. So it's the normal thing of auditing. Show me what you've got. Okay, here's a plan. Show me that you've achieved that plan. You've acted out that plan, and show me all the evidence of that plan. And exactly what we were saying where earlier, you know, you've got to show me an audit trail. You've got to show me the evidence. You know, don't just tell me, show me. That's what I do auditor training. So we tell me, show me. Yeah, show me the evidence.
Okay, thank you.
It brings me great pleasure to welcome my long-term friend and supporter, Steve Furnell, for another insightful talk here at the SM-ITAM group. For those who are unaware, Professor Furnell is a professor of cybersecurity at the University of Nottingham and has particular research focus on the intersection of human, technical and organisational aspects of cybersecurity. He's also on the board of the Chartered Institute of Information Security. For those who haven't seen or heard Steve speak, you're in for an absolute treat. He's able to distill complex concepts into easily digestible and useful content for everyone. I promise you, he didn't pay me to say that. He will talk to us about Psychos, a partnership between academia, professional partners and industry. I'll let him elaborate more on the project. However, I can tell you that Steve will have some incredibly useful insights. And I know we are all looking forward to hearing what he has to say. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Steve Furnell.
Well, yeah, one thing I can assure you is I certainly didn't pay him to say that, because I'm Cornish and I wouldn't do that sort of thing. Everything else he said, I'm not so sure. We'll find out whether it's insightful or anything like this. But as you can already see from the slide here, We're talking about the issue of cyber security in SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, and it links to a project, the subtle logo there, which for the sake of brevity we've called CYCOS, the Cyber Security Communities of Support. There is a longer and more verbose title for the project to come later on in the slide set. How good, the technology works. I can advance the slides. So always a concern, you know, can I actually operate the technology and do the slides look like I'm expecting them to look like? Okay, so we'll begin. We'll have some scene setting on SMEs, their importance in, I suppose, the society, economy wise, and also their need for cyber security, because I think for many of them, quite often the default posture and thinking is, well, why would we need to worry about it to the same extent as larger organizations? We shall see why. We'll link into how this relates to this CYCOS project, the thing that this is all done under the banner of, and then a few initial findings from some of the early research we've done within the project, talking to SMEs themselves, talking to organisations that already provide advice and support for SMEs, and also looking at the extent of the online guidance that's there. If an SME was to have the thought, well, cybersecurity thing, what ought we to be doing about it? What would they actually find unaided if they were to go looking to guide themselves? And then that'll lead towards some conclusions that magically support the idea that this idea of cybersecurity communities of support would be a good way forward, which is lucky because that's half of what we're meant to be doing within the project. Okay. If you've not heard these stats before, these are lifted, taken, reused from the Federation of Small Businesses website. Around 5.5 million SMEs exist in the UK, of varying sizes and sectors. And in total, they account for 99.9, it's quite precise, of all the businesses that we have in the country, generating 3/5 of employment and having a combined turnover of 2.3 trillion. So collectively, they're representing a fairly valuable asset, a significant part of the economy. They are very important to the way things happen. And so consequently, it could be suggested that there's an importance in protecting SMEs as well. Not just against cyber attack and the sort of things you're going to imagine me talking about, but other types of security breach that could occur, the sort of more accidental, environmental, all the ways in which technology could be exploited or let us down. You're going to fail me there. I mentioned technology letting us down, and I didn't touch the key hard enough for it to actually work. And I thought, fine, you're just going to show me up now because I said technology is potentially not going to behave. Right, okay. I mentioned SMEs have issues with cyber security here. From the Cyber Security Breaches Survey, or is that there is. If you've not seen the Cyber Security Breaches Survey, it's an annual survey published now by DCIT, the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. It used to be from the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport before DCIT was separated out. Been running since 2016. And I say all this because I've had involvement in a couple of runs of it, but not the 2024 version. This one's obviously crap compared to the one that I've had a go at. And I was involved in 2021 and 2023. So we don't like the 2024 one. But anyway, what the survey tells us, and it's a fairly consistent story over the life of this survey and others that you may find, is that small businesses are not typically well placed in terms of what they're doing around cybersecurity and their capability and expertise to do something about it. There is a discernible gap between the sort of controls and countermeasures, processes, whatever, that SMEs have in place often and what their larger counterparts might be doing. Now, 56%, according to the survey we don't know, said that they're outsourcing their security. So somebody else is taking care of it for them, or at least they're hoping that somebody else is taking care of it for them. They're recognizing they don't have the expertise in-house to deal with it, and they are paying for somebody else to take it on. Of course, in terms of making that decision and any related choices, it still requires some sort of knowledge, ideally, of where to look, who can provide appropriate service, and what service we're actually looking for. What aspects of security should somebody else be taking on and managing for us? In other cases, they might be reliant upon some limited or potentially limited in-house knowledge. Now, of course, some SMEs, those working particularly in the technology sector, might be particularly well placed to deal with their situation, but many, of course, are not in the tech sector. And others are potentially overlooking things entirely, sort of self-justifying, oh, it won't happen to us, it hasn't happened to us, it couldn't happen to us, it may happen, it's happened to them. Well, anyway, not doing what they should, potentially. Now, I'm going to continue using the term SMEs throughout the talk, but it's worth flagging that SME is quite a broad church in terms of the size of organisations that we could be talking about. So in UK parlance and European parlance, I think in the US it's sort of every number I'm about to give is probably doubled because it's even bigger there. But in the European and UK context, medium enterprises is anything up to 250 employees. Beyond that, it's a large organisation. But then as we go down through the sizes, I mean, just about you can see, sole trader, surprisingly enough, that's one person. Micro organisations is up to 10, small organisations up to 50, and then medium organisations up to 250. So the likely technology usage, the technology expertise, the technology function that you might find across these is likely to vary. So a medium organisation could well be having its own IT capabilities, its own staff and dedicated support without needing to go and outsource it. Micro organisation, unless they're working in the field, perhaps less so. And this is not scientifically determined, this red line, but I'm putting a dotted line there to indicate that the point in the size of organisation at which they're likely to be outsourcing their IT and perhaps their security, and the level at which they're likely to be using external support more occasionally, or indeed even fending for themselves and not making use of external parties. Now, further on in the slides here, I've got some evidence of how that actually breaks down in terms of organisations outsourcing. So there is a bit of method to the madness. But it's also worth thinking about, well, what do these size variations mean in terms of the types of organisations, their use of technology, potentially their default attitude towards security and the need to protect things. So sole traders, in terms of their IT estate and what they may be using, are likely to be using for the purposes of that business, maybe one or two devices. So maybe they've got a laptop or a desktop, a mobile device. That's what they're using as their technology support for their business. Very often, they're likely to be in more professional services, so accountants, finance, sort of more widely. So sectors in which there is maybe some recognition of the need for security through the fact they know they're dealing with sensitive data, they're dealing with clients who expect that data to be protected. There are things within the profession in terms of standards that they're meant to be upholding there. Once you get into the category of the small businesses and the micro ones as well, so more than just somebody operating on their own, then immediately things can become somewhat more diverse in terms of both the sectors and also the technology usage, and indeed having a physical premises that is distinct from, for example, where they happen to live. So now you've got an organisation that has a physical base. It might have multiple employees with different devices, more to be protected, and a whole range of different sectors in which they could be working, some of which could still have a natural, if you like, affinity to the notion of data sensitivity, data protection, etc. Others where it's far more incidental in their, at least in their mind, in terms of the nature of the business they're operating. So I've said they're bakeries to mechanics to IT consultants. None of them have a natural predisposition to protect that. No, they may have varying views about the significance of the data assets they're holding. Some sectors, as I say, place more direct emphasis on the need for security and data protection. So as I've already mentioned, the regulated sectors like finance. Now, again, drawing from the cybersecurity breaches survey, showing that there is this difference in terms of the positioning, the posture of organisations. I've just picked on a couple of aspects here from the, if you like, the policy and planning and preparation perspective. But if you look at the use of technologies, and the survey highlights some of that as well, you'll again find some of these disparities. So if we look at businesses overall, it's not a great picture, to be honest, in terms of only a third of them have a formal policy around cyber security risks, and only similarly about a third have a business continuity plan that covers cyber security. That's businesses across the UK as surveyed in the Breaches survey. Now, a sample of about 2,000 organisations. Now, as you might determine from how the average and the other bits break down, a significant proportion of those businesses that were surveyed were in the micro and small categories. And we can see here that, okay, there, I mean, the micro ones particularly are below the average, just around a quarter, doing these things. Small businesses, it gets slightly better, particularly in terms of having a security-related policy, so it's just more than half of them. And then in the medium businesses and the large businesses, it's a significant majority, but you sort of still point to, yeah, you got large business, 250 plus people, and 15% of them don't have a security policy. I wonder what they're doing with that. Anyway, and they don't have a quarter of them don't have a business continuity plan. Anyway, what does it tell us? It tells us that the size of organisation is a bit of a predictor about whether these things will have been taken care of. And large organisations and the larger medium ones, let's say, they're dealing with more, they've got perhaps more resource and capability in-house to think about these sort of things. In some cases, it's being outsourced, it's being taken care of for them. But in the smaller organisations, less attention being directed towards it, perhaps because they don't have the understanding or the capability to enact it.
Before you move on, Steve.
Yes.
Between the micro and the small, there's a really big jump on who has a cybersecurity policy. Have you spotted any trends as to why that might be? Is it just purely they have enough coverage of people, there's someone who can do it, or is there something that changes in the mindset of the micro as it grows to bigger?
So I think, I mean, I've not got that from the data from this survey, but I think what you can sort of probably infer is that the smaller organisations, because we're now going up to those that have got 30, 40, 50 people in them, they are realising inherently, okay, we've got a population of staff, we need to have a policy to guide those people. It's more than something where you could rely on word of mouth to be doing it, whereas micro businesses, perhaps just a group of them, it's all socialised amongst them, perhaps that maybe there is some sort of understanding about what you should do around security, but they've not documented it. It's perhaps conveyed in that way. Yes.
Do you have any feeling for the quality of these policies? Because lots of people have a policy, it sits under a layer of dust in the back office, and nobody ever uses it.
Yeah, I mean, normally they sit alongside many of the books that I've written about security. No, I mean, it's a very good question. It applies for a hell of a lot of the other stuff that you could pick out in this survey. So don't think I've got here, so I'll just go off on a little tangent. One of the things I like to point out in the breaches survey is that less than 20% of organisations that respond typically are saying they've done cybersecurity training and awareness for their staff within the last 12 months. And you sort of look at it and you think, well, okay, so the vast majority aren't doing it. And then you see somewhere else that the most common threat that's being faced is phishing threats. And that goes after people and you're not doing anything about it. But even in the case where they have done something in the last 12 months, you sort of wonder, what is it they've done? Because the experience I've seen of cybersecurity training and awareness, I get it. Nobody from the University of Nottingham here, isn't it? So I get it at our university. I've done it in the last couple of months. I scored 100%. I was delighted. It would have been a bad thing if I didn't. But I don't think I was trained or made more aware by the nature of the please answer these multiple choice questions, some of which are quite leading. But we pick the box. People do annual cybersecurity training. So the nature of do they do it? And you're going out to the university. Then it's not speaking to the quality of whether it's just basically whether they've got something. Okay, but I think you could lift that lid and find a multitude of further issues. Potentially, it might be wonderful. I'm just not convinced it necessarily is. Okay, now another thing you might have been sat there thinking was, maybe micro organizations and small ones don't do this as much because they don't have any issue to answer about cybersecurity. I'd already told you from the start that they do have a problem with it, so you shouldn't have been thinking that. But here we have, again from the breaches survey, the percentage of organizations that have identified breaches or attacks in the last 12 months. It's something that I don't like the way the survey phrased it, and I flagged this a couple of times to them, but they like to keep it like this because it's then consistent with the bad phrasing that they've had in every other iteration of it. But to my mind, a breach and an attack are not the same thing, because you can have an attack without it causing a breach, and you can have a breach that didn't result from an attack. And these results therefore don't actually let you distinguish who actually suffered a breach, which would be sort of nice to know in a survey called the Cybersecurity Breaches Survey, but who am I to comment? Anyway, setting that aside, because it's not the point I should be trying to make, half of the businesses in the UK have suffered a breach or attack. If you go to the survey, there's also data for charities as well. As we go through the sizes of organisation, we can see that larger organisations seem to have encountered more breaches than the micro ones, and it gradually ramps up. Now, again, there isn't a definitive reason for this. It could be, in some cases, that larger organisations are a more attractive target. They've got a larger presence, more things that could be breached, exposed, etc. Equally, larger organisations typically are in a better position to know if something's happened. They're more likely to have, the data collection, the monitoring, the logging to see if something's happened. I mean, given that the micro organisations don't have policies and other things in place, they might not have eyes on it to the same extent. Nonetheless, nobody can ignore this. It's happening to everybody to some level. Okay. Animation. This is when I got creative with it. And amazingly, it works the same on a PC as it does on a Mac in that particular animation build. So, as it raises the question, it certainly raised the question for me because it helped then to form the grant proposal that got us this funding. What happens then when an SME does have, maybe they've seen a report about the cybersecurity breaches survey and says roughly half of you could face a problem in any given period. And then that makes, well, what should we do about cybersecurity? And maybe they're concerned now about cybersecurity. Maybe they want some advice. Maybe they're looking for recommendations about, well, what service provider or what product or what thing could be good for us. And maybe, hopefully not, but maybe they've actually experienced an incident. So what do they do in that situation? How well does it work out for them? So where do they go, and do they ultimately get satisfaction? So in some cases, what they do quite clearly is they outsource the support. So here again, the breaches survey, we've got that picture of the extent to which organisations of different sizes are doing this. So this immediately gives a little bit of the lie to that dotted line that I said on this side of the line they outsource, on this side of the line they probably don't, because of course some micro businesses are doing it, and they're doing it just to make my previous chart look wrong. But it's more likely that they outsource it at this level. And what you notice also is medium organisations are the most likely to be outsourcing, and then large businesses do it less. Makes sense when you think about it, because the larger organisations then are likely to have that in-house IT and security capability that they can afford the specialists, they're employing them, they've got them themselves. They don't need to have the managed service providers doing things for them, for example. Some still do, of course, yes.
You can outsource the problem, but you can't outsource accountability.
No, indeed.
And that strikes me as being an issue.
Yeah. And again, I mean, this again is part of it, because of course it's your business, that it's you that's potentially going to have your customer data being exposed. You're the one ultimately going to get reputational damage from a breach or anything else that might happen. So yeah, which goes back to that point of, okay, if you are going to outsource it, be clear on what you're outsourcing and what it's giving you. Make an informed decision, which again, they might not be so well positioned to do. Now, looking at the slide that I can see is coming up next, what I'm going to look at on the next few slides is examples of some of the sources of advice that you can find if you do a quick sort of small business cybersecurity guidance advice, something like this as a Google search or Bing if you can't spell Google. One of them, good source, is the National Cybersecurity Centre's Cybersecurity Small Business Guide. Okay, this is one that if you did such a search, it's likely to come up regardless whether you use Google or Bing. And it covers in somewhat more detail than I've got it here, but it's presenting 5 key steps. So backing up your data, protecting against malware, protecting mobile devices, because apparently people tend to forget that these are things that are also worthy of protection, using passwords to protect your data and perhaps supplementing with support, and avoiding phishing attacks. Now, so it actually goes into a lot more detail than this. You can get a full copy of it from the URL. That is a set of headline points that an SME will see from that guide and understand to be the 5 areas of cybersecurity that are most significant for. Keep that in mind. It's a memory test now because I'm going to advance the slide and find something else that came up from exactly the same search. So here from the BSI, the British Standards Institution or whatever it is, groups it now differently, managing your cybersecurity, securing your networks, securing your equipment, protection and recovery. We can see if we sort of glance around here, there are, securing portable devices. There's going to be something somewhere about malware. I can't spot it. Malware, there we are. I knew it was there. But it's not the same structure. They've got more sub-points being listed there. You've got to make an effort to sort of map one to the other, and this is mentioning more distinct issues. I'm an SME now. Got 2 sources. I like the first one really because it gave me less to do. But anyway, this one's now opened my eyes a bit more. Now this one, okay, it's from a website, Forbes website, best practices for cybersecurity, best practices for SMEs. These are the best practices SMEs ought to do. And so now we've got a very different set of points. I would say these are not the same level of more practical, operational, get these things done points. This is now conduct real-time cyber awareness training. I'm probably not even doing it at all. It has to be in real time, be like 24 with that ticker going down. Anyway, hands up who remembers 24. Yeah, I'm good. Nice, wasn't it? Leverage the latest tech. AI is happening. Have you heard? AI is happening.
Apple Intelligence, right?
In December. Acquire cyber insurance. Now, okay, these are all good points, but they're not perhaps as fundamental as some of the other things that the NCSE and the BSI guidance were saying. And now, me, the SME, well, no, let's do this here. It's all different, and there's lots of things for me to consider. And I was just looking for a one-stop bit of, and this is just a big minefield. It's confused me. But actually, don't worry about it, because many SMEs don't even know that there's a small business guide for them to look at, according to the Cybersecurity Breaches Survey. So awareness among the small and micro businesses, i.e. the target audience for that guide, less than 1/5 of them, in fact, demonstrably less by 2024, going down, not up, never the way you want to see it going. They're not aware of it. NCSC has put all that effort into creating the guide and it's finding it. So there's perhaps a promotional issue to be addressed there. And if they find this guidance and if they try to understand it and they try to follow it, what's the end result? How do they feel about it? Do they feel all happy? Not so green is the colour of happiness, really, but anyway. Notably, has security been improved as a result of them doing this? I have no answer to this question definitively, but I do have some quotes from SMEs coming on later on, and I think what we'll find is that it's not always the positive, happy-clappy situation at the end. In, on a big white charger, comes the Psychos project to solve all of these problems. No, it's not going to do that. But what we are trying to do is understand a little bit more about what the problem really looks like and to work towards another channel of providing support. So I promise you at the start, and I'm sure you were on the edge of your seats waiting to find out what the full long-worded and long-winded title of the project is. And you can see now why we just call it Cybersecurity Communities of Support as the short version. Enhancing cyber resilience of small and medium-sized enterprises through cybersecurity communities of support. A long title, I can say in one breath. I have to take a long breath afterwards. 2.5 year project. We are just over a year into it. I can do the maths with the calendar there. And it's not just all about me and the University of Nottingham. We have collaborators from Queen Mary University of London, and we have the University of Kent as well. And even more notably, a whole range of additional stakeholders that are providing input and supporting the work. 2 aims. One of them is a lot easier to achieve than the other. The easy one to achieve is to better understand the cybersecurity support needs of the SMEs. We've been doing some of this, and I'll present some of the findings. The more challenging bit is to pilot this new approach that engages them further in these communities. So the idea of supporting each other in cybersecurity itself. Here is the team. Behind me are some old computers. There's a BBC mic. And we have other members of the team. So Maria from Queen Mary, Jason from University of Kent, Nisha, who's a postdoc with us at Nottingham, and Matt, who's a postdoc at Queen Mary. So as you get further across here, they're doing more of the work. I come and talk about it and present their stuff. I get the trips, they get the report writing. We have a number of partners supporting the work, and they're all sitting as members of our advisory group and steering group of the project as well. So we've got the Home Office. We're rather interested in preventing organisations from falling victim to some of these frauds and things. We have the IASME Corporation. You heard of IASME? So for those who haven't, IASME are the NCSE's delivery partner for something called Cyber Essentials, which are cyber nods, and Josh is very keen to keep putting his hand up. Fantastic. Cyber Essentials, for those who haven't heard of it, it's a set of fundamental security controls that the NCSE recommends for any organisation that wants to protect itself in, let's say, the cyberspace context. So it covers things like having border protection, firewalls, the organisation, keeping systems updated, protecting against malware, etc. So one of the things we're trying to do within the project is, if you like, promote Cyber Essentials as an aspirational goal for our SMEs that we try and engage. Although it's a baseline thing, some of them are still quite a way away from it if they're not dealing with cybersecurity already. So in fact, any step up is good from our perspective, but Cyber Essentials, one of our aspirations for them. Chartered Institute of Information Security, CISEC, as Josh mentioned, I'm a board member of that. We have within CISEC things like, for example, ABC guides that we've produced for organisations around particular aspects of security, so they're making those available. ISC2, a major cybersecurity certification provider, responsible for, amongst other things, the one that most people have heard of is CISP, CISSP, Certified Information Systems Security Practitioner. But they also have something rather more new called CC, Certified in Cybersecurity, which is a baseline entry-level cybersecurity certification. They're offering free certification against that for SMEs that are participating in the project. So if the SMEs want to upskill themselves, they've got access to that training. We have the NCSC right there in the centre, who are our national technical authority on cybersecurity and source of numerous different types of advice and guidance and other activities protecting the UK. Centre for the New Midlands, a think tank organisation in the region that I'm coming from. They've got links out to SMEs in the area, so they're participating in that context. And then 3 cyber resilience centres. So there are various of these spread across the country, regionally based. So we have the Eastern one, which matches to the University of Kent. The East Midlands one, which relates to the area I'm in, and Cyber Resilience Centre for London. I'm not sure where that applies to, but nonetheless, 3 of them, and they are already linked out to SMEs in their geographic region, but not in the way that we're proposing to do with the project. Timeline of the work, bits that we've done, looking at SME needs and their own awareness of cybersecurity, looking at the current support that's available to them from online sources and talking to advisor, guidance and advice providers. What we're doing now, which is characterizing support journeys. So basically talking to SMEs and the providers of support and trying to get them to log things as they happen. So if as an SME, they have one of those cybersecurity related questions or concerns or incidents, to record for us, what do they do about it? Do they go and try and seek support? And if they do, how do they do it? And if they try and do it, how well does it work out? So we've got some retrospective stuff from both parties in terms of surveys and data collection we've already done. What we're trying to do now is capture it as it happens so that we can more fully see where things succeed and perhaps where they don't. That'll provide the foundation for designing these communities of support. And in that phase, we'll also be doing things like developing a support broker platform, rather grandiose name that we've given to something that's essentially a like ticketing and discussion forum system. And then that will lead into doing pilots of the actual communities themselves. The pilot communities, we're hoping to do 3 of them within the last, let's say, 6 months of the project. Our initial thought was that these would be in some way regional, linked to the locations around which we've got the CRCs and the universities. But another angle on it would be to do communities of support based on the sector in which the SMEs are operating. They're talking to organisations doing the same sort of business as them. Or indeed linking it through to organisations in the supply chain of the larger organisations. So they're all in a similar situation by virtue of their relationship to a larger company. And that links through to something that was mentioned in the relatively recent McPartland review, which had proposed the notion of a cyber charter, empowering large companies to share their cybersecurity expertise with their critical third-party suppliers. Now, this notion of the community of support thing would play towards that, because it would be a context in which that relationship would be built. Okay. That's the background. What have we actually done about it? So, one of the things we did, there's an exciting snippet from it, was a survey of SMEs promoted via our partners, via RISKS, the Research Institute for Socio-Technical Cybersecurity, which the project is affiliated to, Federation of Small Business. Ultimately, we got 374 responses from SMEs. What I'm going to have on the next couple of slides is just the responses from those in non-IT sectors, because we think that the responses from those all working in IT might be just that little bit more cybersecurity aware. Not always, but let's look at the ones that aren't working in what's often seen as the parent discipline for cybersecurity. And then we did some follow-up interviews with some of the SMEs that participated. So, how do they rate their own organisational knowledge of cybersecurity? Doesn't tell us a lot here, really, insofar as half of them think it's average, but of course, somewhat like the Cybersecurity Breaches Survey and knowing what that actually means, we don't know what they consider average to be, because they're average, well, on average, we think SMEs in our sector know sod all, and that's what we know, and so we're amongst the average. Could be their assessment. That's a technical term, sod all. We've heard of firewall and can spell it, might mean they're above average, and in some cases it might mean they're actively doing something. We can't really tell what this means other than from some of their later responses. The key thing is this is how they perceive themselves. And it's a fairly normal distribution, okay? What's perhaps more interesting? What's more interesting, perhaps, I thought it was interesting because there's lots of colours and that caught my attention. 2/3 have needed cybersecurity support around something. So we've got a variety of somethings, which those of you wise enough to sit near the front might be able to read, and those of you sat at the back, they can send you a message and tell you what it is. But things like malware protection, network security, phishing awareness. Where's the one that says none of the above? None of the above, a quarter of them. But ignoring none of the above, 2/3 have needed cybersecurity support with something. And so they've not been immune to having a site. It might not have been a breach, an attack might have been a question, but they've had some occasion wanting support. We also asked them areas in which they feel they might have had difficulty. And okay, we asked, have you had difficulty with? And these are the ones that said, yes, we've had difficulty with. Perhaps more interesting is to look at that plus the don't knows. The one, so half disagreed with all these statements. The other half, and in some cases they're actively agreeing, but the other half didn't disagree, therefore they might have agreed, or they don't know, which means they probably don't know what they're doing. So, have you had difficulty finding cybersecurity advice and support? No, they didn't have difficulty. Of course, the question you might ask is, did they look for any? No, we had no difficulty because we didn't look. A quarter have had difficulty with that. Understanding the cybersecurity advice and support they receive. Slightly bigger quarter have had difficulty with that. And then following the cybersecurity advice and guidance, a fifth have had difficulty there. Now that's notable because even if you get guidance, actually putting it into practice could be the bit of, it's the last hurdle and the bit that maybe doesn't work. So a few views from the SMEs. Here's where I should have had a clicker. Some of their attitudes from some of the interviews we did as follows. We'd rather spend money on, remove whatever the core business, this core sector was, but core business rather than spend it on the tech stuff. Now, on the surface, that seems perhaps a bit negative, but in reality, this is going to be actually the fact of the situation for many SMEs. They have got a core business they are trying to run and to keep operational, to keep afloat. Cybersecurity may not be in their top 10 priorities, and even if it's further down the list, they still might not have the resources to actually support it. I would say we've got no security protocols in place, which they weren't boasting about it, but it was flagging up that, okay, that's the position that some of them are actually in. And something that we pulled out because we thought this actually helps towards the notion we're trying to pump with the communities of support. It's very difficult to find peers that have a similar mindset to your own and at a similar size you can have a conversation about. I'm sure they meant with, but about. So that's good because we could provide that context. Now, the other thing, just going beyond, so I showed you 3 sources earlier, the Forbes thing, the BSI thing, and the NCSC thing. We've looked at more things. We looked at 30 plus things. That 30 plus is 31, I will tell you, it's the number we looked at. But 30 plus sounds better. Different sources. We found a much wider set and we narrowed it down to this set, taking basically things that were specifically geared towards SMEs, coming from a variety of different sources. So some were from government sources, some were professional bodies in IT and cybersecurity, some were professional bodies around SMEs, some were insurers, retailers, tech providers, different types of organisation. All of them saying, here's some cybersecurity advice, guidance for SMEs. We looked at what do they cover, how completely do they do it, and how clear are they in doing so. Headline news is there's lots of stuff you can find as an SME. I gave you 3 examples that were confusing enough, and it varies against these metrics quite a lot. So let's have a look. What did we mean by these things? Well, coverage, what aspects of cybersecurity do they attempt to touch on? And I'll show you the reference point we use for that in a minute. Clarity, does it explain it? Does it use language that the SMEs would be likely to understand? Does it tell you? Does it explain what to do is a missing word there? And completeness, unlike that sentence. How far does the advice and guidance go? Does it tell you how to put it into practice? How much is there? How rich is the information that's available? And if it doesn't tell you the complete story itself, does it point you on to other places that might further help you? Now, the next slide, when I bring it up, what it's got on this side, it's got different types of source. So a couple of government ones, a couple of insurers, a couple of tech providers, etc. It's not the whole 31. It's a couple of examples from each type of source that we use. And across the top, it's got areas of cybersecurity drawn from something called the 10 steps to cybersecurity, which is another thing from the National Cybersecurity Centre. What we notice here is that basically none of the sources covered something in all of the areas, and none of the areas were uniformly covered by all sources. The one that comes closest is architecture and configuration, something in the guidance related to what would be described in that one of the 10 steps. if you go and look at this, actually there's 10 steps and the issue of threats, because we also consider does the guidance explain what the cyber threats are, for which you then might want to have these controls. So we had a couple of government sources, IT bodies, SMEs, bodies, insurers, security vendors, internet service providers, IT retailers. And you can see that the story varies quite a lot in terms of how many areas they touch upon. The only one that perhaps you could argue is excusable, that only one is covering, is supply chain security, insofar as most SMEs won't consider themselves to have a supply chain. They might be part of somebody else's, but the things covered within that step of the 10 steps is to understand your supply chain, the security within that.
You're all buying equipment, they do have a supply chain,
Well,
and that equipment could be corrupted.
they do, and they probably aren't thinking of it in that way. That one bit of guidance was, but most SMEs won't think of themselves in quite that way. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, we all have a supply chain that we to some degree rely on, but the extent to which we are able to test it out is perhaps different. Just showing it in a slightly different way, and the colours basically are the extent to which things were likely to have been covered. Engagement and training, not to say that a lot of the guidance was giving good content on how to do engagement and training, it was mentioning that there ought to be something around it for the staff. Okay, so some areas getting more attention than others, but certainly what you might you've heard from this is an SME, depending on what source you look at, you're going to get a very different picture about what cybersecurity ought to mean to you. In terms of the completeness, so we did a subjective judgment on the depth of the guidance that was being provided, and perhaps unsurprisingly, where there seemed to be a greater depth, they tended to be longer documents with more links out to other sources. By definition, if you're providing more and linking off to more, you are giving a better treatment of it. So the key thing here is, you've got things from almost 7,000 words down to about, what's the lowest one, about 330 words of guidance. And if it's a quicker read, if you take that one, the problem looks less significant, but you're probably not going to understand as much from it. And then in terms of the clarity, again, things varied in terms of if they defined what cybersecurity is, if they explained the threats, if they, in a sense, stayed on topic within the guidance they were providing, and the extent to which they required IT and cybersecurity knowledge. And then, most notably, do they provide actionable steps that are easy to follow? And do they actually indicate what good looks like, what a successful outcome would seem to be for you as an SME? So they're only going a certain part of the way. And of course, these are online sources. You wouldn't necessarily expect to just read it and solve your problems, perhaps, unless you're an SME that does expect to be able to do that, which I think some of them would be. So drawing us towards the end, because I'm realising I've not got so much time, we also talked to the support providers, the advisors. When do SMEs, in their experience, come looking for support? Basically, when that stuff has hit the fan. Off the back of an incident, they're not very proactive. And again, it's not because they're bad people, it's because they've got other things on their minds. They haven't got the capacity to have been proactive. It's definitely reactive. I've had an incident, or my supplier now wants me to do these things, and that's why I'm doing it. And the big concern is that not enough organisations are seeking help because they don't know what to do, where to go, and they don't know what support they need. What's their attitude towards cybersecurity, as observed by the providers, the attitudes of the SMEs? A worrying low level of basic cyber hygiene. So they're not doing as much as they should be doing by default. Quite often, they just want you to come in, do a questionnaire because they're losing business and they want it to be sorted out. Come and fix cybersecurity for us, and then we'll pay you and you go away and we've done cybersecurity. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. And there's an apprehension. Why do I need this? Because it costs money, and the providers don't feel that the SMEs really understand what the picture is all about. Finally, opportunities to improve. One is about the content. It needs to be appropriate for the target audience. You can't just expect one resource to solve it for everybody. things that speak to the sector that the SME is working in, the nature and size of their business, for example. Nice one for our cyclos thing, having some sort of bridge where SMEs can find us, we can find them, being more collaborative with others. We like that. And we like this. I feel almost like self-help groups between businesses where competition isn't factoring in and it's a place where everyone can get on a level pegging. So, some concluding thoughts, because you saw I was never going to stop talking, didn't you? So, I think what we saw from the breaches survey, and you can find it in other sources, SMEs are increasingly exposed to cyber incidents. You didn't see that from what I presented because I only presented you with 1 year's worth. But if you went and looked at the earlier breaches surveys, the proportion has grown in the most recent one. The risk for them and others in the supply ecosystem. What I did show you is that the advice that exists, the nature of it can vary, and so can its utilisation. SMEs need the capacity and also the capability, so both really, to be able to act upon it. They need to be able to understand it and they need to have the time in some way to deal with it. What we hope to do within the project, we're already better understanding the situation. Unfortunately, it tends to confirm a lot of the things that we believe from the outset, but then to trial this new approach to give further support. I've already said this bit about the support journeys, what we're doing at the moment, but basically we're trying to understand more about what happens as it happens and where things go well and not. And so if that has whetted your appetite in any way to want to find out more or to get involved, QR code, I'll warn you before you do that young person thing of scanning it, that generates an email to me expressing interest in getting involved in the project. And the idea then is you express what sort of interest in the body of the message. The message doesn't naturally tell me that. And if you just send me a message saying, I'd like to get involved, I then have to respond to you and say, how would you like to get involved? So tell me in the message if you do it. None of you are actually scanning it, so you won't be doing that. You might be manually thinking, I'll do it later by a site that contact at cyclos.org, and that's fine. Or you might want to recommend this to SMEs that you know who you feel could benefit from engaging with us. And other than that, because there are no more slides left to come.
Good afternoon, everyone. I kind of feel like there's not really much left to say, having had so many great presentations so far today. But in every world, there is a new buzzword each week that we're expected to change everything. We've had digital transformations, big data, AI has been mentioned a couple of times. From my experience, each one that is talked about like it's going to replace sliced bread. And actually, the rush to the end game generally limits its benefits. Operational resilience is not going to be any different. If you don't get the foundations right, if you don't get the focus right on the things early on, then you're going to rush to a tick box that says you're resilient and is probably going to let you down when your organisation actually needs it. And that's what we're going to be trying to cover today, is how to dream aspirationally and think pragmatically to deliver value here. Before we dive in, it's what we're going to talk about. Can we get a show of hands who works in Ops Res? Who works in an operational resilience team? Just the one? Okay. Who works in an IT service management team? Just a couple, okay. And who works in any other area of the business? We would argue that all of you work in operational resilience. Some of you just have a closer associated title. Hopefully by the end of this, you will have gained a clearer understanding of the role that service management will play in your organisation's operational resilience plan and how you can execute techniques and strategies to support your organisation's operational goals.
So here's our agenda of what we're going to run through. These are like the sort of serious titles, but there'll be maybe not as much humour as that's a hard act to follow. Try. But we're going to start going through like balancing the fine line between what you've got to do in order for your regulatory compliance, but also doing what's best for the organisation. So we'll start going through the regulations and the impact on service management. Then we're going to talk about operational resilience and ITSM and where it exists. If it exists, it does exist. As Joe says, it's everywhere. We will then have a little bit of a discussion about the various challenges, some practical approaches to find the balance between doing what you've got to do, dealing with, in some cases, red tape, in some cases, it's just the way it's got to be, but also being pragmatic about how you're approaching things. And then a theme that's going to run all the way through, which actually we've heard in every presentation we've had today so far, collaboration is key. Communication and working together. And then there'll be a bit of time at the end for Q&A. But before we dive too further deep, that was backwards, too deeply into it, we'll do a little bit of an intro as to who we are.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't need notes for this one, but I'm a generalist service operations manager, particular affinity towards major incident management and strategic vendor management. Generally worked in public and private sector, dealt with higher education, healthcare, and currently in financial services. I have dealt with centralized models, decentralized models, group models, very small organizations, and quite a lot of that is relevant to the different challenges that people are going to face. Outside of work, I'm a committee member for the BCS Service Management and ITAM specialist group that facilitated this event. Also a magistrate in the North Yorkshire bench, sitting as an adult criminal court, sitting in the adult criminal court as a winger. And thank you to Matt Philpott earlier for keeping all of our criminal records, as he pointed out.
So basically, if you go to Yorkshire, just be careful, because you could be in front of Joe if you do anything naughty. So I'm Sophie Hussey. I am, what am I? I have been working for myself for the last 3 years, but my career started nearly 25 years ago, longer than I would care to remember, where I was on the service desk. I've had all sorts of different roles, be them technical, be them service management specific. And I've worked in a variety of industries. Predominantly, my career was in financial services, where, just looking at Sarah at the back, ops res, SMCR, the risks and everything associated to everything that I did as a head of service management was drilled into me to the nth degree. It's been interesting the last couple of years stepping away from financial services, but I've worked with other organisations who are regulated in different ways. For example, well, the retail industry, not so much, but betting and gaming industry as well. It's been quite an interesting, eye-opening experience, but I've got a wealth of experience of service management. I'm on the committee that Lynda chairs for the ISO 20000 standard, and I do a whole host of volunteering for STEM ambassadoring, being a STEM ambassador, because I'm trying to future-proof service management and get the younger generations in. Not necessarily work related, but I'm sharing, so we're going there. I've been learning Finnish for the last 7 years. I'm too scared to talk to anybody from Finland in Finnish, but I've been learning it. And I'm also known to be hanging upside down on an aerial hoop, which is literally a metal hoop suspended from the ceiling, which at my age is not the easiest thing. But anyway, you didn't ask, but sharing is caring. We will dive into the next.
Okay. This might be a little bit late in the day to be going back to basics on it, but when we think about regulation, I guess a lot of people will be thinking red tape, bureaucracy, and some of you may just think it's boring. So I think a good place to start is why, and why is regulation important? There's been a lot of mention about ticking boxes today, but it's more about protecting people and protecting the markets that they operate in. GDPR, for example, ensures your data is managed appropriately, particularly in the digital world. And another financial regulation is SM-CR, which significantly raises the accountability and governance requirement in the UK financial sector following the 2008 financial crisis. Other financial crises are available. These are real world issues that go beyond an individual organisation, that have far-reaching repercussions and transcend business, would probably hit every one of you in this room, your friends and your family, when they are not taken seriously. So in that same context, what's driving operational resilience? So the world has changed, and most organisations, particularly those in the financial sector, are adopting more technology. That means more data, and often this is underpinned by complex digital infrastructure that are hosted by third parties, be it in private hosted data centres or public cloud setups. And this ever-increasing reliance on technology means there is an inherent risk for potential systemic failures. Operational resilience ensures organisations are set up to predict, avoid, withstand, adapt and recover from significant business disruption that can topple organisations. And again, I look back at the 2008 crisis, Not just excessive risk was taken by financial institutions, but a lack of resilience to change in those market conditions and deal with the repercussions. The way operational resilience addresses this is by elevating the focus on risk management, continuity planning, and incident response. And we'll go into some detail on this a bit later. Something that I was surprised hasn't come up today is, does anybody know what powers regulators actually have to deal with significant breaches?
I thought so, very heavy ones under GDPR.
Yeah.
Up to, was it, 25% percentage of your gross annual product.
Yeah.
And that was millions of dollars.
Yeah, so I've not got it in detail. I've got financial penalties.
Yeah.
But there's also compensation, which is separate to the financial penalties, and also mandatory operational changes. So an example of this was a well-known payday lender a few years ago, probably about 10 years ago now, who had multiple breaches. That saw 2.5 million in penalties, but over 400 million in compensation. So that's where they got hit hard, and also mandatory changes to their business practices.
They can be shut down, can't?
Yeah, if they don't meet the mandatory changes, yeah, I don't know whether or not that it's a secondary impact of that they shut them down, or whether or not it's they can do it outright. So to conclude, regulation isn't a tick box. It's not something to do until next year. It's something that has to be accepted and embraced at a cultural level to ensure that it's built into everything that your organisation does.
So from a service management perspective, and I'm repeating some of what Lynda has already shown us today already, there's a number of frameworks and things out there that you can do from a service management perspective, whether it's ITIL, whether it's COBIT, the IT for IT, ISO 20000 standard. But I have a question for you. How many of you have heard the term or somebody saying, we are ITIL compliant?
Many times.
Too many. Many times. Absolutely. It gives me joy asking that question when people say too many times, because you cannot be ITIL compliant. The only standard is ISO 20000. If you're going to get accredited for service management, that's what you've got to do. Everything else is a framework. And if it's a framework, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to take what it says in the book and do it. It means you read the books, you look at the guidance, you look at multiple frameworks, and you cherry pick the bits you need to make it work for your organisation. I'm going to quote someone in the room who has written a book about co-creating value, in that you've got to make sure that whatever you do does actually co-create value with the business. So it's not a case from a service management perspective, you go to your organisation and you speak to your business leaders and say, right, we are implementing service management and we're going to do A, B, C, D, and E. They might say, well, actually, we don't need C. We only need half of E. What we actually need is 1, 2, and 3 instead. How can you help us? It's all about working with the organisation and adopting your framework to make it work in the best possible way. The one thing that I will say, which Lynda also mentioned earlier on as well, when it comes to having an ISO standard for service management, you are audited. And what Lynda mentioned about was talking about you measuring whether the requirements are met. If you're not ISO accredited, you can measure maturity. You can measure to see, actually, are you meeting your service management goals? Are you delivering those things that you've promised your business that you're going to do that deliver the value? So, carrying on from where we've just been, let's talk about ops res in the day-to-day service management.
So, a bit of audience participation, but I want everyone to picture themselves in a meeting room. We can say Sarah Kreisman has just been appointed your head of operational resilience, and she's asking about what plans you've got in place. How many of you can picture someone from your organisation that probably has all the answers to every question, except where is it written down? I would imagine that most people can, either in their current organisation or previous, picture someone actually quite specific. So let's talk about how to recover or set your business up in the event of a disaster or where resilience is needed.
So let's talk about the resources. We've spoken about incident management multiple times, and the question Joe's just asked you there is basically how many people can actually recover these things when they go wrong. When you're talking about building resilience into what you're doing, from a resources perspective, do you want those people that put on your superhero cape, who run in, they save the day, everything's all up and running again, they go away, they take the glory. But actually, what happened? How did you fix it? How did you know what to do? Where did the information come from? What if you're saving the day in a different part of the world and we still need a superhero? Who can don that cape? Who can do that in your absence? When you're talking about resources, you need to make sure that you've got a team that can enact a recovery plan as a collective, that there are other people to go to, that it's not necessarily just one way of doing things. You've got multiple people working together. So when you're thinking about resources, you need to consider key areas and power skills. I'm stealing that phrasing from a friend of mine, but you need to think of things like communication, collaboration. I did say collaboration was going to appear a few times in this. Capabilities, skills matrices, succession planning, talent management, all of that stuff comes into the consideration when it comes to having operational resilience from an ITSM perspective on a day-to-day basis.
Yep, and we don't want to demonize the heroes either. They're crucial to what we've got. The challenge that we need to do is try and get that information out of their head. You can't afford for them to walk out of the organisation with what they know. And some of the ways you can capture this is with documentation, policies that have been discussed a lot today, processes, but some other things in terms of role descriptions to help kind of guide who should be doing what, how-to guides, training, ticket history, trends, service reviews, service models, catalogues, change logs. All of these things can contribute in terms of that knowledge. It doesn't just have to be just in policy and process alone. As anything that you can learn from or draw from to support in building resilience from an IT perspective, ITSM perspective, should be in scope. So realistically, in today's world, the delivery of services are likely to include third-party and vendor management. I think it's been talked about quite a lot today. So even if you're using on-premise solutions, there's probably still going to be third parties involved.
So just because Joe is one of his areas of expertise with vendor and supplier management, I'm going to ask you the question. What are the sort of 3 key takeaways that you think you need to consider when it comes to managing third parties in association with our topic today?
I think audit plans is probably one that is undervalued and probably not thought about at the original outset. Certainly prior to this, the operational resilience coming in is probably going to be something that maybe needs a bit more focus going forward. Exit plans. I know we've had a talk today about exit plans that aren't really fit for purpose. Even if it's a plan for a plan, it doesn't. It's having that starting point on day one. And I think we did talk about earlier on the testing things beyond just basic DR, and losing one of your critical suppliers would be a really useful test as to whether or not you would be able, even as a paper exercise, to test whether or not you could actually cope without that. And the last one I'd say is termination rights. If things aren't where they need to be, particularly in terms of dealing with external market conditions, then you may need to be looking at changing your model, and being able to get out of some of those contracts is probably going to be quite crucial.
So the reason I've asked Joe that question particularly is because, as I said earlier on, I no longer work in financial services. So the last 3 years I've almost been on a bit of a recovery of the shock of how highly regulated that environment was. When we were prepping for this deck, and I was writing some bits and pieces about what you'd need to do on a day-to-day basis when it comes to your third parties, I went completely against everything that I've taught, and I was very insular in what I was looking at. I was thinking, right, okay, I'm in the organisation. What do I need to care about? I didn't consider the stuff from the supplier perspective. I completely forgot about that bit because I wasn't focusing on the right area. So I was thinking about things like, do you do DR testing? Do you have your backups in place? Do you test your backups? All of those things internally that are your control mechanisms, without remembering to consider that third parties have their part to play in this act as well. Everybody's got their sort of stake in the game. And without having that sort of wider consideration and thinking, that collaboration, to remember that these third parties they're your friends, they're your partners. Without them, you're not going to have true operational resilience. It was very interesting. That's why we asked the question. So, I mean, I guess the main thing there is collaboration is key, yes, but we're in this together. Third parties, whether they are your internal suppliers, your external suppliers, whatever it is, everybody's in it together.
Yep. So one of the questions or one of the things that's been talked about is the IBSs, which I believe is how the FCA have branded that. It wasn't a a term that's been chosen. And the role that plays in the organisation and how to map the service management practices around that, how you map the services around that. And one of the things in here is that the customer is not always right. One of the challenges we've got at the moment is aligning service models to important business services and trying to differentiate between how we support a service because of its DR capability or our reliance on it compared with the actual criticality to our core business. And that's something that is probably going to be quite challenging to manage with senior stakeholders.
Absolutely. So if we jump on to the next bit, we're going to talk about a little bit of the specific with the various service management practices and how they link into OpsRes.
So everyone knows a lot of the obvious ones. Incident management's been talked a lot about today. Problem management was mentioned as well. We kind of thought that would probably happen, so we've tried to think of some that are maybe less common to try and link into as well. So you can see all of these. We've chosen 6. How many of you can, at first glance, see how they link into operational resilience? Again, possibly at the end of the day, is probably you may have all been lined up for this already.
So obviously this is the service management track, not the ITAM track, but asset management is here for a reason. It falls under the arm, in my opinion, of the wider service management. And when it comes to operational resilience, it's not just a case of having an asset list of who's got what computer and where. It's the interconnectivity between all of these services, these whether it's an information asset, a people asset, technology asset, whatever it is, you need to understand the relationships of how these things work together in order to build in resilience. Because if you don't know how it interconnects, if the proverbial hits the fan, how do you know what's got to come back up again, in what order, and how it all links back together? How can you make sure that your customers are getting that service that they need, whether they're internal or external customers? You've got to consider asset management in your operational resilience.
Yep, supplier management we've already covered a little bit, but it is a really important part. I think it's going to play a bigger part in operational resilience than anyone really realises just yet. Again, we need to look at how we build those stronger foundations in delivering those services, not just stopping outages and how they happen, but actually, again, collaborating with those partners in terms of how we respond to those situations. Service catalogue management is also going to be important in terms of understanding that the metadata associated with the different services and being able to recategorize them and prioritize accordingly. You need to know what support models you've got in place around each of these, who uses these services. The list goes on, but again, like asset management, the catalogue is going to be a really important point of knowledge and wisdom, and using that data, that information and knowledge in conversations over the next couple of years.
So then, of course, we have risk management, which should be self-explanatory, but let's just take a step back. I'm going to go a little bit stereotypical here. How many of you have interacted with software developers that do not really care about risk management? All they're doing is they're coding, headphones on, and they're just doing what they're doing to deliver that service. They don't necessarily consider that there is risk in every single thing that they do. If they're copying a code from somewhere else, how do you know that code is good? If you're using some sort of generative AI to help you code, whatever it is, how do you know that's come from a good source? How do you know that what you're doing is meeting the requirements? There is a risk there that you're not delivering to what your customer needs. But then there's the bigger thing, my favorite ITIL practice or service management practice is change management, because I'm a bit of a psycho. But when they're writing their code, are they considering actually putting that into test? What's going to happen, how that's going to go in the live environment? What are they basing all of their information from? So for me, when it comes to risk management and operational resilience, it's making sure that everybody understands what risk means in their job. Same as OpsRes, risk is in every single person's job. It may not be in their job title, but it's there all the time. And then we've got knowledge management. We've already spoken about the heroes with a cape that come in and they save their day. Knowledge is power. If you don't have things documented, whether it's your process, your policies, your procedures, the things that people do on a day-to-day basis, how are you building in any resilience? I loved when Sarah was doing her opening speech talking about, Is it written down? And there is something that Sarah said that I've been known to say for my clients a lot recently, which is if it's not in the ticket, it didn't happen. So if it's not written it down, don't care. Prove it. You show me where that is. You show me how I can repeat that. You show me the preventative actions that you've taken. If you've not written it down, if it's not documented anywhere, if that knowledge isn't captured, then we're nowhere. So that's really key for me in operational resilience.
Lastly, stakeholder management, which is probably my favourite practice, to be honest. We've discussed this one it's relevant to all the others as they interlink. And this can be anyone inside, outside the organisation, supply chain, clients, anything really. Building strong relationships is going to be really important, and maintaining them is vital when it comes to operational resilience and service management. In order to do that, you'll need to speak to them, build those relationships, foster collaboration and cohesive relationships. And in particular, you need to find out who your operational resilience champion is in your organisation, because they are going to need your help over the next couple of years.
Something extra. I did some sort of animation and hadn't realised. Magic. So this image is pictured. It's on here for a reason. I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. I absolutely love going to Northumberland. I like going to the sea there. The beaches are amazing. And we often, as a family, go to Lindisfarne. And there is a beach on Lindisfarne that is just a pure pebble beach. And there's lots of these towers. Now, everyone else in my family is really good at building these towers. They're really high. They stay for ages. Like we walk away and they're brilliant. Mine are rubbish, absolutely rubbish. Trying to find the right stones to fit in the right way just don't work. I don't know what it is. I don't rush. I try and take my time. I consider the size, the shape of the stones. I would like to say I worry about which way the wind's blowing, but it's always windy on Lindisfarne, so it's fine. But no matter what I do, finding that balance is tricky so that I can build this super duper tower. The same thing can be said for the balance between meeting your regulatory and legal requirements and having a service management function that is going to do what you need it to do, delivering value to your organisation.
There are going to be challenges. Each function, each department and each team is going to have its own objectives, deliverables, even each person. And these competing priorities and projects and risks don't make for an easy work life. So you've got to consider what's the best approach to get where you need to whilst maintaining the balance here. And through magistrating, often we're in a position where the situation, you've got three people making a decision and you don't have the opportunity to go and ask for more information. You don't have the opportunity to sleep on it. You have to make a decision that's going to affect someone's life there and then. And one of the key strategies there is to find what the common ground is, find where there isn't that conflict, park that, and then really kind of embrace that conversation of why someone else is thinking the way they are, trying to work out whether or not you can follow that train of thought, try and explain how you've got to where you are, see if you can get them. And at some point well, there's no court case that's not, that's not been solved that way. So at some point there has to be that agreement, compromise, or maybe even just a little bit of time for people to kind of step back from what their priorities are and decide whether or not there's another communal priority to be raised as well.
So what you really need is you need to find your sweet spot. Balance is not going to be easy. There is no one size fits all. We've got the typical people, process and technology. If it's too weighted in one area than another, you're not going to find your sweet balance. You've got to take in all of the various sort of factors and considerations to get operational resilience into everything that you're thinking about when it comes to service management, particularly if you're working in a highly regulated environment. But even if you're not, you should care about this stuff. Absolutely, you should care about stuff. There are organisations I've worked with in the last couple of years who don't even consider the basic bit of risk management. And I've walked in and I say, well, what's your risk appetite? Oh, I don't know, just write us a risk. I can't write you a risk or rate it or do anything with it if I don't know what it means to you. If you don't care, you should. What's wrong with you? Crazy people. So there's this sweet spot in the middle that you've got to find in order to drive the message people need to understand. You need the technology to support it and the processes in place to make it all happen and everything work in a nice cohesive way.
And this is going to be a time investment. There is no quick fix for this. It's got to be in your culture. It's got to come from the top. It's got to come from the bottom. It's got to be in the middle. It needs to be part of the foundations of the organisation to build this resilience into every practice, and everyone has to care about it. If they don't, there is a weak link there. It's got to be co-creating value. Dr. David. And piecing it, and trying to bring it all together. You can't do one thing and not another. There's no silver bullet for this. It's got to be all encompassing. It's got to come from every angle.
So you're on your journey. You're ready to go. High five, yeah. What you need to do now is figure out all of the various component parts that you need to do.
So now you're ready for your journey. If you like to train,
I do.
you're ready for your journey to walk the line of pragmatism between IT service management and operational resilience. And what is that you need to help you on your way? Sorry, Sophie has not written that sentence very well for me.
You're welcome. So, first things first, all aboard. Whoop, whoop. Who's on your squad? Who do you need? You need a team of people. You need the right team of people. You need to understand what skills, resources, be they people or whatever else, you need to bring it all together and make sure you've got a solid set of individuals and information to drive you on your journey, or climb aboard the train, not drive you. That would be a very strange analogy with a train. Anyway.
Trains.
You do?
That's why they have trains.
It's been a long day. It's very warm in here. Thank you, Joe.
Mind the gap. You've got to have your eyes open to the challenges. You've got to embrace them. There's no point ignoring them or you will fall down.
Blow the whistle. Accountability, people. If somebody's doing something wrong or there's something that's not going to plan, it's not a case of you're throwing them under a bus, train. What you're trying to do is say, actually, we have a problem here. We need to do something about it. We need to course correct. You need to engage with the right people and keep people informed.
Tickets, please. You've got to be realistic and honest. I don't know what the link was between that one.
It's links to accountability as well.
Okay.
You've got to make sure that you say what you're doing. So you've got your ticket, get on the right train. Make sure everybody's on it together at the same time. And then the other thing on there was the calling out, the ticket thing that says where you're going, it's your tech. You need to consider the tech that's involved in order to help you on your operational resilience journey.
The key takeaways, not to steal Richard's job shortly, but plan to plan as a fallback if you can't get everything defined just yet, and get the foundations right.
One of my favourite things to say a lot all the time at the moment is question the status quo. Just because you've always done it this way doesn't mean it's right. Ask questions, be curious, engage some form of critical thinking. Don't just take what is given to you as face value, and that's the best way to do things. And then my nice Venn diagram, you've got to balance it together, the people, the process, the technology. If you don't get that sweet spot right, then you're going to come a cropper somewhere down the line. You need to make sure that you've planned everything. Like Joe said, you've got to plan to plan.
Any questions? Sarah?
So I'm just queuing off of a comment you made about stakeholder management being the part that you were particularly invested in. And I've been in companies where a particular supplier was the best thing since sliced bread, and at the next company, the exact same supplier was an eternal disappointment, always letting you down.
What was it?
I'll tell you, IBM, absolute favorite go-to supplier at one company, the devil's child in the next one. So just curious if you have any thoughts on that stakeholder management of what is an appropriate amount of investment with your supplier to make them your hero, not your Achilles tendon.
For me, one of the things that I often find in organisations is the latest and greatest supplier is somebody that the bigwigs like and they love, but they can't necessarily put any reasoning behind that. There could be lovely dinners or whatever kickbacks they get on that's making a very slanderous statement, but there's always something else extra in it that I don't necessarily see, or I didn't see as the head of service management, certainly, or in other organisations. So it's your due diligence. You've got to actually compare apples with apples, not apples with oranges. And the other thing with it as well I'll ask what's the needs of the organization, what are the requirements? Because what may have worked really well with one model in one organization won't be anything like that at all in another organization. So I would say when it comes to your due diligence, it's not just what you need, but is what can that person offer, and then can they verify it? Certainly I've worked in organizations where we've gone through the sort of RFP process, and it was interesting, the sorts of testimonies that were given from these suppliers, like how much did you pay them to say that? Because that's not what you get when you search when you go onto Google, not Bing. I agree with you there. And it's that verification, actually, can you validate that these people are going to do what you need them to do, whilst also trying to, from the stakeholder management, break out those influencing guns and try and stop the bright and shiny view from being the one that's taken and actually taking the one that's best for the organisation.
Yeah, I prioritise objectivity there in terms of people say like money talks, but the stats will talk. You'll know from your service reviews whether or not performance is good. You'll know from qualitative feedback whether or not performance is good. You'll know from your major incidents whether or not the investment's there, and that changes over time. I do believe that most people don't come to work to do a bad job. So I think that is, for me, is where the stakeholder management comes in, is trying to understand if something's not going right, is having that conversation, because the chances are they probably think they're doing a good job.
Any other questions?
Not we're
Just a quick one. What do you do if I've worked for big, apparently successful financial companies, where very low maturity, blame culture was rampant. The official policy was obey the letter of all regulations, but obey the spirit wherever possible. And how do you take a company like that and start this thing going? Because by the time they've called you in, there's been some incentive from the top to do this properly. And a lot of these people are making lots of money in the short term, and the view is basically, when it all goes horribly wrong, I will do somewhere else and I've got my bonus with me.
So I would say, I'll take this if that's okay. From experience, I've joined organisations before who had gone like a certain way down the path on their journey to be compliant without any consideration of service management, the provision of services. And this is where it's like Joe's favourite process that we've shown, stakeholder management comes in. So at a previous organisation, I was given a nickname, Smiling Assassin. They didn't mean it in a nice way, but I've turned it round to be a nice way because I actually really like it. Now, with that was because I was giving bad news and I was influencing people whilst being friendly and helpful and helping them from a customer experience perspective. So if you're in one of those environments that's sort of very blame culture-y, and you've got those sorts of challenges,